Yes. The last part of this session is by Sumit from the CERN and Open Quantum Institute. And let me. Yes.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here to talk about shaping quantum computing specifically for society. So this builds immediately on what Pieter was saying about making it practical. Because what I'm going to talk about is science diplomacy in action. This was born a few years ago at the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, where they gathered researchers, developers, and other experts from around the world to assess the emerging trends in science, and to see which ones could be anticipated and worked on in advance. So of the ones that were most hopeful, they formed working groups to take the pulse of the different communities that were working on it, whether it be the scientists, the policymakers, the lawmakers, the IGOs, or the philanthropists, putting them around the table, taking this pulse and putting it into action, seeing what you could actually do to anticipate the impact and to steer it towards a positive impact. So the one that came out, emerged as the forerunner, was quantum computing specifically. And they decided to launch a pilot, a 3-year pilot, to see if we could really put this in action. Quantum for good, for real. So that pilot launched last year. We're now towards the beginning of the 2nd year of the pilot, and we've only got 1 more year to prove that actually this works. So this is really taking the anticipation through the dialogue into action. So the JESDA teamed up with UBS as a funder and with CERN as a host. And why? Well, CERN is used to doing worldwide collaborations, bringing people together on a common purpose. But more importantly, it's also used to doing it openly, getting everyone to agree that not only do they work together, but they work together and everything that they learn is shared with everyone else. So it really is for the common good that it's done in this manner. So all of the frameworks that we had already at CERN, we're trying to now apply to this new domain as well. But it wasn't just about making an institute, a handful of people. It was about mobilizing a global community around this common endeavor. So actually, with these frameworks I was talking about at CERN, we've been trying to gather together real commitments from partners, from members that are joining the Institute to work together as a global community. And you see big names, medium names, small names, people new to the field, lots of interest from all different sectors. I'm proud to say KIT's on there as well. So what are they actually working on? So fast forward, we've broken up our work packages into 4 different activities. Activity 1 being the acceleration of the applications, the identification of quantum computing use cases geared towards the SDGs. As Pieter already said, this is an easy proxy. Rather than debating again what is human impact, societal impact of value, this is a set of frameworks already been agreed on, so we could get to work straight on those by trying to identify applications that could actually accelerate the achievement of them. To be able to do this, of course, you need access to computing, quantum computers, simulators. So the second activity is to do with democratizing the access. But really, to get everyone to join in, you have to acknowledge that not everyone is at the same starting point or has the same ability to actually contribute. So therefore, a major activity number 3 is to do with the capacity building, developing the educational tools, but also developing the programs such that people can get up to speed, get it to a level playing field, and actually meaningfully contribute now in the activities of developing these use cases. This is all geared towards avoiding that digital divide becoming a quantum divide, and really making sure that we have participation from worldwide. The fourth activity is around the governance. We've been talking about it in several of the talks already, about activating this multilateral governance, making sure that we have a neutral forum where all the different actors can get together and explore the issues and potential solutions, and put in place now things that could guide the future of the quantum computing development. So, making it practical, I'm going to go back through each of those and talk about the actions that we're working on, starting with A4, Activity 4, the multilateral governance. So we've been nurturing a global community. This happened even before we actually started. As I said, that's how we created the idea of an institute being the answer, was by nurturing this global community of dialogue and working out what the issues were, taking snapshots and producing reports and intelligence reports on what quantum diplomacy could be for advancing applications to the Sustainable Development Goals. So we've been updating that regularly. The end of last year, we updated it, adding, in addition to the existing chapters, updating those, but adding chapters on the trade, on the value chains, talent and education, and on human agency. So again, just exploring the entire space and writing it down as a snapshot so that we can develop year by year in the right direction and work on the issues that it throws up. But governance is not just about global governance, it's about our own governance as well. So we put in place an advisory committee that really takes from the best of each of these different communities and gets them to steer us in the direction that we were hoping to go in. So this is a picture of our advisory committee, and you see that there are 10 ambassadors, so the diplomatic community, there are UN organizations represented, the leading technology, academia, philanthropy. So it really is a multi-stakeholder endeavor to try and steer us in the right direction as well. I get onto the advancing capacity building, so a major A3 stream. So one of our first activities was to form an educational consortium. As I said, it wasn't for just a team to say what we should be doing, but to get the leading educational actors from around the world to actually say what they were doing and to debate what collectively they could do even more together to advance the quantum education. So we formed this consortium, and it was the consortium itself that then worked on what were the initial actions that we should be taking. On the technology front, towards the researchers and developers in the different communities, is to put together quantum hackathons, focusing specifically on the SDGs, and to run them in all geographies, the underserved geographies across the different continents. At the same time, not just addressing the technology side, but also the policymaker, the diplomats, the agencies, is running a quantum diplomacy game to raise awareness of the geopolitical issues and the implications of quantum computing as one of the emerging technologies. So this is a real it's a serious game. It's a serious game, a role-playing game, where we fast forward the participants into the future where quantum has really arrived and the issues are really being discussed, where supply chains aren't equally distributed and people can control them and stop the free flow of the ideas and of the access to the technology. And then we take them back again and get them to debate what they could have done now, today, to prevent that situation happening. So this is a fantastic way of throwing people into the real problem and getting them to debate about it. And then, of course, because this is 2025, the International Year of Quantum Sciences and Technology, where we're working heavily, strongly together with them, with the steering committee to put together events for awareness raising. So in action, what does responsible capacity building mean? It means inclusivity, it means engagement. So that really, as I said, it means not just us coming up with ideas, but an educational consortium formed of more than 55 institutes. Already many of them have signed with these commitments I was talking about as members. So in practice, what does it mean? So we've created this idea of a quantathon, a quantum hackathon in a box with a prescription of all of the things that it takes to run a successful hackathon. But we don't want to be the ones that just go in a few places and make it happen. We want to stimulate an ecosystem where it spreads and scales around the world. So what we've been doing in our program is, in fact, working out how we train future host institutions such that they can be the amplifiers into their local regions and run more and more of them. It's not just about an event, it's about the training that goes before that event. Again, I said to bring all the participants up to the same level. So different pre-hackathon training programs that they can get certification in the technologies that they're going to be using during the hackathon, and mentorship. So the top companies, the top academic institutes around the world offer office time to the participants so that they get trained and they can ask the questions that they want, so that this really rapidly gets them up to speed before the hackathon takes place. And it's not an isolated event, because afterwards then we help them into the ecosystem by giving internships into the different members and partners around the world as well. So putting this all together, we call this a hackathon in a box, is about making it possible to scale up with our support, but also allowing institutes who just want to be inspired by us and not specifically supported by us to take the same concepts and to expand them in their local environments as well. Similarly, for the quantum diplomacy game, it's not just about running the game, it's about training facilitators so that we can put it in all sorts of different environments. We've run, and it's not just for the policymakers, this is really for everyone. We've been running it in academic institutes to get them to understand the policy aspects, in the IGOs to get them to understand the environment of the technology and the guidelines that are required. So it really is to get each of the different actors to understand the different aspects. Just to show that we've started with a set of distributed activities, and as I say, we've been targeting local actors that can then scale and have an intention of scaling within their regions around the world. Moving on to A2, the access. So it's, of course, within the applications, as I said, we need access to the pool of quantum computers and simulators to be able to run the applications that we're developing. But it's much more than that. It's the access to the tools, the libraries, the educational material to understand how to develop them and how to run them. But also getting access to the specialists in the companies, for instance, to be able to tailor it and optimize it to actually run efficiently on the quantum computers and simulators of today. And as I say, not just in terms of applications, but in terms of training. When you're learning about quantum techniques, of course, it's more beneficial if you can actually try it out. So gaining access to the pool of quantum resources also for the training program is important. So finally, onto the applications themselves, the A1 activity. We are trying to support and develop an entire program of development of applications. So it's not just asking people to come with a concrete solution, we run it and it's finished. It's helping them from the idea phase, how you create that into a real use case. What is the computing challenge? Is it a quantum computing challenge that can be expressed? What's going to be the impact of it? So just this methodology for creating applications, quantum applications for the SDGs is something that we're developing and trying to make guidelines on. Again, with the idea of scaling out is to capture what we're learning in the way we're doing it, developing it with the top experts, and then giving it out as an open resource so that other people can do the same as well. And a bit on to what Pieter was saying about assessing impact. So in moving these applications through the different phases, we have review committees. Experts from around the world come and help us. They also help with the improvement, of course, to get to the stage where they can be reviewed, but also on defining what are the guidelines to do an impact assessment at all. And again, we're wanting to publish all of our learnings so that we collectively improve these and develop them for everyone's benefit. So we're advancing. We've got about 18 now applications at various different phases through this pipeline. I'll just show you a few examples. Here's one already at the simulated phase 3. So as you see, diverse actors, they have to be supported by an IGO, NGO that's actually implicated in that field and is motivated to achieve and to assess the achievement of the SDG. So in this case, 6, SDG 6, clean water. Various different quantum approaches being addressed by the different spectrum of applications that we're dealing with. So here, this is about water scarcity. So this is affecting countries across the world. And we know that in many of the larger cities, unfortunately, the treated water never actually reaches, even if you've got treated water, it never reaches the intended recipients. Some of them, 50% of the water never reaches them. So the question that was posed, the idea here is, in this environment where there are national initiatives, there are interests, there are local interests, there are commercial interests, how do you, having one view of the entire water network is extremely difficult. So how are you going to place some sensors to work out where these leaks are actually happening? What's the optimal way of strategy for doing that? And then for addressing the leaks. So that was the question that's being addressed with the quantum optimization approach. But back to the practicality of it. So last week, members of my team, together with ambassadorial from Geneva and ministers from Mexico City, went in and talked to the local actors, the local water distribution networks, to see if they could get information that then could be used. So it isn't just a theoretical simulation. This would then become a practical activity of really mapping this onto a real network and seeing if the real actors would then take the learning and be able to do something with it. So this is really all the way down to making something happen today. Similarly, just very briefly, I know time's running out, for other SDGs, here's one from the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, is helping us with. Again, a diverse team that's working on crop pangenome to try and see if we can address the question of how to improve the crop management systems, gene editing technologies, so we can enhance the crop characteristics. I said there is a variety of approaches. I just chose another example here. Again, very wide broad interest in this particular one. 2 different IGOs supporting us in it. This one using the quantum simulation. So as I say, we don't know which of the different quantum approaches is going to be the most useful. So we want applications that are trying each of them, and we'll see how far we can get in each of them. Quantum simulation in particular is viewed by the field as one of the most hopeful approaches, where quantum advantage is most likely. And just for diversity, here's another use case with participants from the Middle East, Northern Africa. 2 different agencies again, the World Food Program and the ICRC, and it's addressing 2 different SDGs, you could say. It's on efficient It's on the efficiency of the delivery, food delivery chain. So less food wastage, but also less emissions if you can do it better. So all of this to show, I hope, really quantum for good in action. So in shaping quantum computing for society, as I said at the beginning, there are three different aspects: the anticipation, the acceleration, and the actual translating into opportunities. I hope you've seen that through the OQI, we really are finding traction in the community and finding that action is possible today. Identifying opportunities, we really are getting a lot of ideas on what you could do to address sustainable development goals, on working out what the support needs are in order to address them, creating the opportunities for all of this dialogue to happen, and producing more and more ideas on how you can actually guide the development of these of technologies responsibly. Offering the support, we're getting a huge amount of offers from around the world for developing these technologies, advocating for doing it openly, and giving the open resources such that people can self-train and get up to speed on it, and implementing these best practices for capacity building. As I say, the community really has lots of ideas and willingness to join in. So basically, showing that really it is a reality that you can use quantum technologies for equitable innovation rather than instruments of division, even today.
So one very quick question and then right.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, this one doesn't work, so we need to take this one, sorry. That on it?
Hi, thanks for, is this on?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for a great talk. I'm Natasha from the UK's National Quantum Computing Centre. And we're doing some similar work in terms of identifying applications for good. Be really interested to hear more about the impact assessment and what kind of went into developing that and what that looks like currently.
So in fact, it's one of our ongoing activities, and we're working with people that are within the UN ecosystem that are actually working on similar impact assessments. And we're trying to make a framework now that all of the assessors can work on when doing these assessments. As I say, it's May is our first round of assessments, so it's active development at the moment. So I'd love to work with you on that. At the same time, as Pieter said, this isn't just about the assessment of an individual use case. We're also going to generalize it to assess whether or not the institute itself is achieving the goals. So that's a much more defocused approach. As Pieter said, this is really necessary for all of our initiatives, is to self-assess whether or not we're achieving our goals.
Welcome back to the second session. And we will just continue with the second volume of the responsible QT efforts. And well, she doesn't need any introduction in this community, but yeah, Fabienne from Quantum Social Lab will start this session. And the floor is yours. Should I keep this? Okay.
No, I have one, but I can also take two. Yeah. Cool. Yes, two. Perfect. No. Welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I think it's the second or third time we are here with the lab. I'm very happy to talk, I think this year 3 times, about different endeavors of our lab. So we're kicking this off with a talk on responsible quantum technology efforts. And as I know that a lot of you already know the work we're doing in the lab, I decided to take you a little bit on a journey, what we currently define as responsible quantum technology efforts and where we are with our thoughts. So see it a little bit as food for thought and why we change so often, like our focus, etc. It's we keep all the other things, we just like constantly go on adding effort. So I think the question at the moment, no matter with what, is what's the question to ask? Well, this is just in theory working.
Click on the presentation.
That's okay. I think it's nothing. But there we go. Yeah. So for those who don't know the lab, the Quantum Social Lab is an initiative we started 2022, end of 2022, at the Technical University at TUM. We are part of the TUM think tank. So if you want to have details on the structures, we can do that, but that's a longer endeavor. In general, what we are doing is that we are trying to build a space for actually living and developing responsible quantum technology development. Living by bringing together different disciplines, different stakeholders, different topics, and developing in terms of algorithms, social concepts, etc. I tend to say the only thing we don't do is quantum hardware. Quantum hardware is out of our business. We basically engage with it, but we don't do that. So long story short, we operate on 4 pillars. So one is education, including teaching, including our scholarship program, which are the YQSS. So hopefully the next generation of scientists, policymakers in the area of quantum technologies. So the YQSS are a young group of junior researchers. They're coming from different subjects. So we have quantum technology scientists, we have physicists, we have computer scientists, we have political scientists, we have psychologists, we have everything in there. So we basically mix all these efforts and try to make a team out of it and basically gather the best of all these worlds. And then classical, we're at the university, we're also doing some research. Research we mainly do on social implications, ethical implications, and legal implications of quantum technologies and algorithms in that regard. So what's the fish? Okay, so responsible quantum technologies, we heard today already how you can define it and that it's a complex topic. So we most of the time work with the definition which was brought up by Maurits Koop and all his collaborators. I think one is here, Eline is here, and Descazeaux, the co-founder of the lab. So it's not very surprising that we work with that definition. So in short, with the implications, it's called ELSP, and it's about safeguarding, engaging, and advancing. So these are the basic principles this framework works with. We actually try to work with these core principles as well, and based on them, we work with responsible quantum. To make this very sure, this framework is a very good starting point, but it's very, very broad. So this framework is the starting point we try to basically operationalize and also work with more concrete, actionable items to basically get that a little bit further. So if I break it down a little bit more, then we say, okay, we are screening for opportunities and challenges of quantum technology. So we have an exponential increase in patents for quantum technology inventions, and we see that rapid innovation, but the question is, how meaningful is that rapid innovation? Yeah? So not every patent means that there is something big happening. We are expecting that it will revolutionize multiple fields. So in the lab, we are mainly concentrating on health, banking, and security as one sector, on language models in terms of QNLP and medicine. So there we work together with the University Clinic of the TUM, or the TUM Rechts der ISA, who knows the old name already. So these are our partners there. In security, we're working with Fraunhofer ISAC in big projects. So then what do we also anticipate? We anticipate that we have, in the end, a redefinition of interactions with the world. This is going also a lot in the direction of the combination of quantum technologies and neurotechnologies. And our core topic here again is then the responsible development and use. So one of the biggest problems when we have like the talks about responsible quantum technologies, then a lot of times we come back to let's responsibly and sustainably develop and use these technologies, coming again to the question what to do. The problem with quantum technologies, this graphics, by the way, is from one of my brilliant PhD students, Katalin, who's there in the room, is that we are already here in this market introduction. On the other hand, we don't really know where it goes, and we don't expect this technology to go with that circle. So the problem is, as quantum technologies is a technology which is converging into other technologies. All these innovation models don't really work anymore. We don't expect that we have that classical cycle, which leads us to the question, how can we basically work and govern a cycle where we don't know how it looks like? A lot of people would say, okay, it's anyway just a technical problem. If you look at the news, you already see it's not just a technical problem. Nothing ever was a technical problem. Technology is used by human beings. So necessarily, nothing in the development and application is just a technical problem. So what happens now that we know we have responsible quantum technologies? We want that. We all want that. We want a sustainable future. We want a responsible future. We also figured, okay, we have a definition, but we have to further basically develop that definition, and we have to handle that in a way. So we have two very different approaches at the world, and then we would also have the Chinese approach. So we have on one hand, a little bit, okay, let's have a party, let's have the technology, let's ignore everything else. And the United States is not that bad, it's over aggregation. And then we have Europe, and Europe is a little bit known as the regulator on steroids, trying at the moment very much to regulate here very strongly. Different parts of Europe does that in very different manners. So if you look over to the European Union, then they try to basically have a European ecosystem. If we go over to France, then we see that France is doing a little bit their own strategy, closing a lot of things up. If you look at the plans for 2025, 26, 27, you can see that France is a little bit playing their own game there. So we have two approaches in terms of strengthening the responsible development, or at least they want to do that in Europe. And then we have the United States, who also basically say we need sustainability, responsibility, while still focusing most of the time on the geopolitical power and economic growth coming with that. So if you look at that, and if you look at responsible development, we neither want basically a technology which is in a cave mainly concentrating in Europe, nor do we, on the other hand, want a free run of markets like proposed in the United States. By the way, just as a disclaimer, this is a 15-minute presentation. I just shorten a lot of points here. We can discuss all of them in depth, but then we would be here for I don't know, 5 days, just me talking. We don't want that. So we have the societal impact of quantum technologies, and one main point in the lab is that we think that we need to have more frameworks to work with that, but we also need to benchmark. We have to find ways of measuring that. So we see that quantum computing comes, for example, in various forms, and it's not existing. It's inherent uncertainty, and we try to see that this is a feature, not a bug. The uncertainty coming with the devices itself is basically what makes these devices so powerful, that we have real randomness, etc. So what we try to do is basically to say, okay, we have a technology trajectory which is hard to predict. So let's make out of this bug that we don't know anything, if you want to say it harshly, a feature. What questions to ask? So we have this definition, but we also need more concrete questions. It's always good if you search for answers if you know what questions to ask. So one question we a lot engage in is the question of the global divide. Quantum technologies are complex to build, and at early development stages, specifically expensive. They are at the moment energy-intensive devices. So the question is, who will have access to these devices? Who will most benefit from applications? And whom do we want to get on the table? This is an endeavor which we also share, for example, with GISTA, with the OQI. We try to get these countries to the table. Specifically, in that regard, we have some initiatives, a lot of them with the global network of centers, where we go in these countries and help them with roundtables, sandboxes, etc., trying to build a future, which is probably one of the most responsible things you can do. While quantum technologies offer so much insecurities for the global south, it also offers a lot of chances, because they're not as behind in the knowledge, in the development with this technology than, for example, with AI, because the industrial states are also more behind. So we have a bigger window of opportunity there, not just because of this, but also, for example, because the education systems have to be revolutionized. We want to have education which is more targeted to quantum applications, be it in math, be it in physics, etc. So we have a window of opportunity here. Even I would personally not say that this window of opportunity is quite big. Then the classical thing, the question of the encryption breach. The question of the encryption breach is interesting in terms of consequences, and the question is how can we transition? The encryption breach, it's not that exciting as you can most of the time read in public media. Why? We have the algorithms, we know what's happening, we in theory know a lot about the problem, about the mathematical base of that problem. So we actually know how to, we just have to find a way, but we know the beginning and the end point. Other than with the lot of trajectories around other applications, we know that. So the question here to ask is, if we want to be responsible, how can we shape the transformation, the transition? It's not so much like, how can we have PQC? There's also a lot of things going on. We can see that the world is basically preparing the biggest problem and what's in the way of this responsible transition mostly. If you ask us, then it's that we have a problem with the talent pipeline. We have a problem with like getting new ways of collaboration between economy, industrial partners, etc. So tell me what you need. So there are different ways to approach this. And I said, okay, we need a way to handle these problems. And our way or our framework at the moment is definitely interdisciplinarity. Yeah? This is at the moment the best way we can handle that. So at the moment, quantum technologies are inherently interdisciplinary. Physical principles, computational devices, mathematical algorithms. This is basically our mathematical notation to describe everything else. So this is something all agree. However, to run any algorithm in this world, we have a lot of data with these devices, which means that if you want to explain to someone who says like, why responsible, etc., why does this have to do anything with society? I want to go back to the technical side. One argument is everybody who ever tried to run in a legal space without, just saying, okay, where there is no judge, there is no problem. Any algorithm on huge amounts of data will know that we are running into a lot of legal and frameworks to basically work with that. So that's the easiest one. If we talk about quantum computing and quantum AI, then we can also go another road. Still interdisciplinary, but we can take another road. So the road of basically saying, okay, I start with the technical part, because in the case, for example, of quantum AI, we all agree that we want more intelligent AI, at least the tech bubble. I know there are also voices who say, I don't want even more intelligent AI. Let's keep it stopping here. But let's say, okay, where to build the bridge, then we can also say, okay, we just seen like what we do, saying, okay, we have all these social questions arising around and we need to engage with them now. And then we can say, okay, we need to work together on this. And working together on this means having interdisciplinary collaboration, which means we need two sides basically, and we need a system in between to communicate between those sides. So this is the other part. Now you might have still very skeptical people. And then I say, okay, that's still the case. Come to the Quantum Social Lab. I show you the other bridge. The other bridge we have is to say, okay, let's take the technical use case. Okay. And then if we want to be responsible, we will still say, okay, how can we ensure the freedom of speech? How can we ensure, for example, bias-free political communication? But still, can we create human-like intelligent answers? This is a technical question again. So say, okay, let's scratch this for the moment. Let's just go there. And then you will still find out that this is an interdisciplinary question, and we will, in the end, come back. We just started to go over this bridge from another way. So you can basically say, okay, what's technically not in the system available right now? And that's, for example, argumentation and causality. What makes something intelligent? We are back at social science. We are back as what is thinking. You can go with Vergil, you can go with Einstein, you can go, if you're a mathematician, with Barenboim, but in the end, you will always come back to, you need a way of arguments and power. If you now want to include that, quantum technologies is one of the first answers you get. The problem is, if you want to get onto the right side of this graphics, then you need quantum advances or even quantum advantage. You need more mature systems at a certain degree to include and work with quantum data, etc. One use case I just very quickly wanted you to show is quantum superposition in language models. The ambiguity of language is something you can very easily model if you use superposition to say, okay, depending on the context, on the window frame, etc., I have a different interpretation of the word. So even from a technical side here, you can bring that in. So to wrap this up, because I know I'm at the end of the time, we can build different bridges to this responsible development, but we need to find a system and ask the questions to find answers for different sectors and different problems for this responsible development of this technology we want to. So basically here you can also see the team members' names. You see bigger and bigger name, a bigger team growing. These are the questions we ask ourselves, and we can dive again there in all of them. We have QLP data and code, energy and finance, education, arts, innovation, the majority world, the sovereignty problem, consciousness in machines, and decision. If we take all of these things together and build one framework, what we're trying to do for 1.5 years now, I would say, then in our opinion, we have at least one way, a responsible effort. I don't say that's the only solution. I don't say that's the golden solution, but that's one way to go. And I hope that we find here in these days, but also the next years, a lot more bridges to convince more people and have in the end more smart answers. So as I said, another bridge. If there's one thing I can say which should be the one thing we should all do for more responsible development is, let's start thinking again. Thank you.
Thank you.
So hello, everyone. So my name is Ignacio, and today I brought you a topic that is related but maybe a bit different to what we have been discussing, but I call it quantum work. You will soon know why. But basically, I want to speak a bit about conversations on quantum. Okay, so I want to start introducing myself. Some people ask me, why are you putting your picture and so on? So just that you know, I have a very mixed background. So I come originally I'm from Chile. So if you want to practice Spanish, just come to me. Then I did my studies in business and economics. Then I moved to marketing, and I always thought that I was going to be working in the wine industry. And then it's a very fun industry if you like to drink. And then all of a sudden it happened that there was a good opportunity in the tech industry to get some money while I was doing my thesis. I said, okay, 1 year there, I get good money, I do my thesis, I'm done. I spent 7 years in that industry. It took me 7 years to finish my thesis, but I finished it. But my point with this is that I have very mixed elements. My family comes from France also, so I also have that background. My interests go from business, marketing, physics, technology. And then all of a sudden, at some point, I said, why not doing a PhD? I prefer academia, actually. Let's just move to academia. And after 7 years in industry. So my point with this is that now that I'm a researcher at the Copenhagen Business School, and I do research on emerging technologies, and I look particularly into quantum computing today, I've been lucky enough to listen to multiple conversations in multiple domains. And that's basically what inspires my research and what inspires the talk I'm going to give today. And I have an image here, and I just want to check very fast. Do you know where this image comes from? Okay, so if you were born after 1990, you probably don't know about it. But this comes from a movie, not a very famous movie, but a very interesting movie that is called Mind Walk. Okay, so it's a movie from the 1990s that is exactly that. It's a movie that shows a conversation between a physicist, a writer, poet, and a politician. And these three people, during the whole movie, have a conversation in the Mont Saint-Michel in France. So the movie is only 1 day of conversation where they speak about multiple things, including quantum mechanics. And they speak about their views about how they see the world, how they understand it. not really challenging their views, just exploring and being quite open on their understanding of it. And then what I want to talk about today exactly about that, about conversations. What are the conversations we're having in quantum? And that's actually what I do in my research. Because there are some conversations we all know are happening. There are some conversations that are starting, that people are being more aware. And the last group of conversation, that is one that I'm really interested in, that is the conversations we're missing or simply not having. So if we look at the conversations we all know are happening, probably if you Google quantum, or today if you ChatGPT quantum, you will find immediately hype, pro algorithm, the end of the world, we're going to become millionaires, we are the US, we're China, we're Europe, we need to fight with each other. Those are topics that everybody is speaking about, and probably that image of the quantum chandelier is the most used one in most presentations of quantum. If you look at it, it doesn't matter if this is the current state of technology, this is the one we use. I use it a lot because it's easy for people to understand that we're talking about quantum when you use this image. But then there are other conversations where they're starting, or maybe they started a few years ago, and now people are getting more aware of. For sure, the topic on quantum responsible use or quantum ethics, today I think they are getting more track, better track. I mean, just look at this same conference. We're coming more and more people to participate into this. Also, the topics on women in quantum, on quantum and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a few others. Maybe, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but for example, under European Quantum Flagship, they developed these guidelines for promoting equity and inclusion in scientific events and other meetings. So these topics are getting some track, and people are talking about them. Probably less that about the quantum hype or how we will destroy cryptocurrencies and stuff, but we're now talking about this, and this is really important. But then we also have conversations we're missing or simply not having. Some conversation is, how do non-physicists make sense of quantum technologies? I remember I went to a conference a few years ago, and I was explaining that I was studying this. It was a computer science conference. So these computer scientists, they were all studying quantum computing, and they were super polite when I explained what I was doing to ask me, or rather than ask me, they commented and they said, I think these philosophical conversations you're presenting are important for the future, but not really now. And that's a point of view. I'm not sure what that person referred to when saying philosophical conversations, because for me, those were conversations that were happening now. People were speaking about quantum, but it was happening. So how does this change of paradigm affect current technological practices and organizations? I think this goes in line with what Pieter said in the morning, that even if we don't join the startups are already doing stuff on quantum. And the number of companies working on quantum, and I'm saying quantum at large, in sensing, in communication, in algorithms, in computing, etc., they are doing a lot. So if we don't join them as researchers, as policymakers, as people interested into this, we will miss something. And I love this meme about quantum. And if you haven't looked at quantum memes, I recommend you go to Google and look for those, because they are so much fun, but they are also so true, that they say, I don't know what a quantum computer is, and at this point, I'm too afraid to ask. So this is what is happening. A lot of organizations, particularly private companies, are putting a lot of money into quantum, not necessarily knowing what quantum is or what we can do, still investing heavily into it. So having these conversations in mind, one question comes is, okay, why should we care now about quantum? Why not waiting for when it's ready? Today, I do research in multiple domains. I do research in management, I do research in information systems, in science and technology studies, organizational theory, and so on. And this is a question I get all the time. Quantum technologies are not fully ready. Why should we care about looking at them today if they are not ready to use? Let's just wait when we can use them. And I wonder, where have we seen this before? Where have we had that conversation before and then we regretted it? With AI. Everybody was telling the same story with AI. No, why would we start discussing this if AI has still 30 years to happen? Then ChatGPT came out and now, oh, everything is AI. To the conference you go, there is AI. What it means, we don't know. but this is a conversation that is happening. And I think activities like this one, where we are now, help us a lot into developing these conversations. So these missed conversations, as I call them, might generate two more complex situations. On the one hand, there are some important conversations we're not having, creating a blind spot in potentially future relevant topics. Maybe there are elements we're not discussing because we overlooked them. We think they're not that important now. We say that we need to wait before having those conversations. But the problem with emerging technologies and with the fast kind of movement we're having now is that when they are ready, it's already too late. So at least you have to pave the field for having these conversations. And also, these conversations maybe are happening and we're not aware of. So there are some important conversations we're missing by not inviting the people leading them or not being invited to those conversations. If you look at what is happening in Europe, in the US, or in China with quantum, most of the policies at some point claim that we have to be prepared for what China is doing, we have to be prepared for what the US is doing, and so on. But if you look at how quantum is being developed, things are happening everywhere in the world. Okay, from a geopolitical stance, I understand we have to look into the big players. But there are also some smaller players that are having very interesting conversations. I was with a physicist a few years ago having a conversation about quantum, and he was explaining me that he attended a conference in Brazil. And it was a conference on quantum mechanics, and he said that it was fascinating to attend that conference for him because the urge to have a quantum use case was not there as it was in Europe. So for them, they could have more open conversations about quantum. Just as Fabienne said, giving time to think. So what he said is that he learned a lot because he said that theoretically, they were developing the field much more. Not necessarily better, not necessarily going more advanced than what we're doing here in Europe, but they were opening conversations we were not having. So that's really interesting how the field advances in different places and how we should listen more into this. And we don't even need to travel to these places today. I mean, you just go to YouTube and you will find a lot of quantum conferences happening across the world. And now with GPT, you just can translate them immediately. So it's really important to have this in mind. And some solutions that we can see in this space that are happening now is that we're offering more diverse spaces for thinking and having conversations about quantum technologies in different domains, and also encourage transdisciplinarity. And transdisciplinarity is not just about, okay, let's have in one same study a physicist, business person, and a policymaker, just like those jokes that they all enter to about. No, it's not just that. It's also about stances like this one, where we come from different domains and we look at how we think into this. Because maybe we use the same language to refer to different things. Let me just share an example. So at the Copenhagen Business School, when I'm doing my research, we have been conducting different studies into how the narratives are explained into quantum. And a few years ago, we looked at 140 YouTube videos on people speaking about quantum computing. Physicists, people from the media, investors, different panels about quantum, I mean, a very big mix of people. And we were looking at what metaphors of quantum computing are used by practitioners. Why metaphors? Oh, because metaphors are very interesting to make sense of complex ideas. So it was very funny because some of these metaphors were quite obvious. For example, for the venture capital people, they were saying that quantum computing in particular, but quantum technologies were like a yo-yo. Like basically, oh, we're interested in it. No, now we're not interested anymore. Oh, this is nice. Oh, now we don't see results, so we don't continue investing. So they were a bit more pessimistic about quantum. It's just another technology. Let's go and we see if we can make money out of it. But for some other people that were fascinated by quantum and probably also by the Marvel movies, they thought that quantum computers would help us teleport to the moon, teleport to Mars, because they just read quantum teleportation without understanding what it was. But that was another narrative going. And these narratives build reality. That's how people understand these elements. But okay, you can say, Ignacio, these metaphors are really funny. This is nice, but what do we do with this? So that's where theorizing comes to help us. And we were actually looking at these metaphors, and we noticed that some were more optimistic, some others were more pessimistic, some were looking more into the future, and some others were looking more into the present time. And then we created a table because we love tables. And basically, we identified that we had different perspectives into this. Some perspectives that were more on the threat side, on the negative side, were looking at quantum technologies just as a more skeptic element. We don't believe it will happen. We don't need to care about this. This idea of the yo-yo, this idea of the mirage, that just like atomic energy, it's like, oh, it will never happen. We say that it will never happen. But then there were also the people that maybe watch a lot of Terminator movies because they were concerned about what could happen in the future, that quantum would destroy everything. Also, a lot of conversations about democracy, about how quantum technologies might increase the problems we have today with democracy. And then for the more optimistic ones, where they were looking at quantum from an opportunity perspective in the short term, they believe that quantum would help evolve technologies. How do we mix current technologies, what we have, with quantum? Basically, it's like adding a vitamin shot and we have a better computer. But then for some other people that we call them the dreamers, quantum is like the next step in the evolution of society. What is interesting here is not really how much of this is truth or not. We don't care about that, but about how people make sense of it. Because these different perspectives help also understand why people do things. So of course, you can imagine that if you talk to companies that are more on the optimistic side, they are most probably more open to invest in these technologies or to start big projects into this. While if you're on the more negative side, probably you will have some elements to discuss into this point. And wherever you are in this place or not, will also affect how this technology is responsibly developed. Okay? So going back to the Mind Walk movie, this is something I would like to see in the future, this more quantum walk conversation, where we have multiple participants, not just a philosopher, a writer, a politician, and a physicist. I would like also to see machines. What actually ChatGPT is telling us about quantum. I would love to see also people from business, because business people are having big conversations on quantum, and they are not really participating on every other conversation, but they are putting a lot of money into it. I would love to see policymakers, but not only from Europe or from the US or from China, but also from other parts of the world, where we can see how we understand, because this is affecting us all. So in that note, thank you so much. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I think we have some time for questions because the next one starts at 10. So we have at least 4 minutes. Let's start with Natasha, but
Thanks for the great talk, really interesting. I'm interested to know a bit more about the participants of the survey. Were they kind of completely, did you get a sense of what their backgrounds were, that kind of thing? And did you do any kind of priming or educating or engagement before you did the survey?
So you mean for the metaphors story that I told? Okay, so I think this was even better because we didn't survey them. It was, we just went to YouTube and we looked for videos where people were explaining this. So we didn't find them. It was really what they were talking to the people. So the public discourse was what we analyzed in that sense. The group of people was super varied. We have physicists from different parts of the world. We have policymakers, business people, companies working in quantum technologies and companies investing in quantum technologies. And also we had a few educators also in the conversations and many media companies.
Gracias mucho. Tengo una pequeña pregunta. So my question would be, we've done a similar study regarding metaphors regarding on AI, right, like 5 years ago. So I'm wondering, taking your really interesting research as sort of a jumping off point, perhaps it would be time to make a meta study on the question of what about all of those things we've already done regarding AI? Can we harness either to see the differences now, or perhaps to have similarities, right? Because Seiki has been sending out those fantastic updates on a recent study regarding formulations of job descriptions in quantum jobs descriptions, or media reports on quantum in Netherlands, and those things sound very similar to the things which have been happening on AI a couple of years ago, right? How are AI jobs described? How does media talk about AI? So is there do we already have one of those meta studies on the big differences? Or should we perhaps do that at Copenhagen Business School?
I mean, I'm always happy to collaborate, so no problem with that. What I don't have a full answer to that, but what I can say, there are some studies that have been looking at meta-analysis into AI, not compared to quantum, but I've seen those on AI. There is also a conversation of what do we mean by AI, because today AI is mostly about generative AI, but AI, depending on the field you are, might be expanded. I do see elements that are comparable with quantum, but also the comment that sometimes we have with the people I work with is, as Deleuze and Guattari said, that the racehorse is more different from a farm horse than the farm horse is to the ox. So maybe the point here is it okay to really compare quantum and AI, or are we speaking really about two different beasts that we have to check? But if you want to talk more about that, let's go to the break. I'm happy.
Yeah, one final question.
Yeah, very short. Just actually wondering, because you do talk about conversations and inclusion, and you talk about we when you talk about the work you do. Who are the people, especially disciplines, that you are doing the work with?
So that's a very good question. I always forget to explain who we are. So I combine my work with the academic side and the industry side. So when I speak about we, I speak on the one hand with different academics, not necessarily in one and only field. So as I said, I'm technically more present in information systems and management, but I do work also a lot in STS, in physics, supporting the more human or social side of the science when I work with physicists. I also am a virtual scholar at the European Quantum Readiness Center. I work with Jacob Scherson, with Simon Gooney, who will be presenting, I think, tomorrow in 2 days, also with Eleni Kariri, and there we are all mixed and everything. So yes, the we, I really define it as a mixed group. The only thing that I think is important is that whenever you enter in those more transdisciplinary conversations, you need to define, okay, which audience are we gonna have or be involved with? Yeah.
So let's thank you guys again.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the reason why I'm here for a second time is that actually someone fell out, and Sig and I thought, okay, this is the perfect time to do some advertisement. And that's what we're going to do. So this is a paper or an effort by Seiki Jacob Scherson, who was just mentioned, and Oksana Mishina, who's not here anymore. So that's a shame. And it's a project to get more attention and more breadth of our own research as part of that scale up, which I mentioned in my first contribution. So what I will present to you is a call for attention. Some already, I see some smiles already, some already know it. And I want to have your feedback on it. And also, yeah, because there you is the invitation. It's a call for, actually a call to ourselves as a community, and it's a call to Europe and then European Union, so whomever is outside of that. Please support us, but it's a call for this specific community. So there's a bit of a limitation, and the aims of that call is to for us to come up with a kind of research program which we can offer to the European Union to help them support them in developing a responsible quantum technology. it's also a call to them to say, okay, we want to be more visible. We want to make we want to be part of this enterprise. Okay, this is the call. I think we'll can distribute it later, and the slides are probably also distributed, and there the different links are there. I can say, what can I say about it? Well, the background of it, reason why the four of us started with this project was that we saw that much of the European efforts, namely the quantum flagship, was really focused on R&D. Of course, they developed these technologies. They were open, as was already mentioned, for a couple of societal issues, such as education and diversity, sustainability. But then it's kind of stopped short. There's, at least in the flagship, not much attention for all the topics which we discuss right here. So yeah, that was a motivation to start banging on the doors. Hey, we're here and we could contribute. And the reason why we wanted to do it right now is that, of course, that flagship is a little bit in flux. It will be redesigned. There's also the way in which Europe wants to develop quantum technologies is changing. Maybe also the member states become more important. And there is actually so much room in Europe. So every Horizon project should have a societal part in it, a little one, but yeah, given this enormous amount of money being spent, it should also pay attention. Yeah, it's enormous attention for us. Yet what you see is that it always goes to outreach or narratives and talking, which is great, but also our work can more generally be squeezed in. So what did we do? We wrote down our position. We distributed it to already to the community, and we asked for support. And we're now planning to do a next phase. We had some endorsements already, and we realized immediately when we presented it to the flagship that to say, okay, we did something wrong, and we were really happy. We had kind of more than 30 endorsements all over Europe. All kinds of institutes were joining, but then they said the European flagship said, "Yeah, 30, come on, that's not enough. Let's start with 300 endorsements." So that's the next call. We are planning a new call to our community to endorse and to build on this effort, aiming at much more endorsements. And one of the mistakes we made was, or I made was, okay, we should look at leaders or heads of departments. No, we shouldn't have done that. Everyone here in the room can endorse that call if you want. Finally, what we want to do is to make a portfolio of all our research as we do it, because there's also quite some lack of knowledge in the flagship in Europe about what we actually do. We all have our own context, but in broad, they have difficulty. So we need you. We need your advice to make this next step success. We need your endorsement, and the call and the web form for giving your endorsement will be distributed in a minute. Yeah, we would like to invite you to also help us. Oksana couldn't continue working with us. She had another job, so I had to redistribute her priorities, but still much more people can join us. We're with the three of us now. If you want to help with making these next steps, please contact us. Finally, if you have a one-pager on what kind of research you do, please submit that too. This is a QR code to go immediately to that webpage if you want to do it right now. But what I now am interested in is, well, first of all, I've informed you how your opinion on how to improve on this poll. How can we organize this? With that, I want to hand it over to you.
Yeah. I'm Jürgen Altmann, physicist and peace researcher from TU Dortmund University in Germany, a long-time worker on preventive arms control and military technology assessment. I saw the keyword EDI, which for me means European Defense Initiative. So is there room for looking at military applications and guidelines for such in the UE level in that core? I think there's a big gap in research about these things, in particular in quantum technologies, but in all others, AI, etc. as well. So I think it would be good to have it included somehow.
Yes. The answer is yes, absolutely. So this call is for policies, for any efforts which can help the leadership in Europe to make better decisions on how to develop quantum technologies. That means advice from our backgrounds, from our disciplinary backgrounds on how to develop it economically, how to develop it socially, but also how to develop it such that security and defense is assured. No, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, actually, on this paper, I exchanged quite few very long emails with Zeki, because it's called like a social research, but a big part of, from my perspective, it's my personal opinion, big part of social research is missing there, like including here, peace research, international security, armament, disarmament, military applications. That I think that it's still social research, and I think it could be included, especially in European perspective. We have quite some laboratories on ethical research on quantum, like in TU Delft, in Munich, but basically we don't have any center for strategic studies or international studies regarding the quantum. That I think there is a much bigger gap on this side. I'm not saying that ethical is not important, but there are even bigger gaps that where this call to action could be interesting opportunity to cover these gaps. So that's my small message.
Yeah. So the call consists of two parts. One, to ourselves, what can we offer to European leadership, but if you abstract from that to the world with our knowledge. And if, let's say, that assessment leads to the conclusion that we miss something in our repertoire of knowledge, yeah, then we should say so. And we should arrive at a agenda of what we want to develop, and that could be part of that agenda. We need a quantum security institute, think tank, or whatever. The second step is we want to make that knowledge available to the development of quantum technologies by inserting it into the flagship or efforts done on the member state level. In that sense, everything can be inserted. The problem is that, well, apart from education, EDI, but then in the sense of which we can't say anymore in the US, diversity. Apart from that, there's not much attention in the leadership for ethical, legal, social aspects of quantum technology. We want to push that, say, we can support your decision making, your policy making by that knowledge.
Anyone else? Oh, yeah, sorry.
Just wondering how kind of interdisciplinary and more technical research is falls within, and how if it falls within the current scope, and whether it could be kind of how you plan to address that.
That's a good question. Yeah, so what you do in the UK, that's really marvelous, that you bring in these values into the, let's say the lab floor. I think the call is more directed on bringing our work into the policy level. There might be indeed a blind spot there. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. How could you do that? How? Yeah, no.
I mean, I think maybe it's even just, I'm just scanning through it now. I wonder if it's even just worth, you've got the kind of incorporation of societal research in different ways, and then you've got those lists of ways to engage, maybe even just having it as one of the bullets of interdisciplinary research across the full quantum technologies spectrum. And I think there's, I mean, as well as the kind of the sustainability side of things would be relevant, I think some of these kind of more technical tools and standards could be relevant as well on the societal and ethical side.
Yeah, it should be part of the agenda. Absolutely. Thanks.
Anyone else? So if not, we can thank Pieter.
And Sophie.
All right. Are we unmuted? Lovely. You don't hear me. I hope you hear me now. Fantastic. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Seki, for putting this together. I would like to do things a bit differently, because I come here with a huge interest to share some of the ideas that I've been working on, and I'll explain in a second in what context I've been working on them, and to get your input and your feedback. So you're basically my peer focus group. Fantastic. But first of all, to start things up with a sort of a local note, my birthday is 28 January, so you can put that into your calendar. If you want, you can say happy birthday to me, but somebody else's birthday is also on the 28th of January. And what happened on the 28th of January in the year 1719? Somebody was very tired and angry, and there was the local marshgrave, Karl Ludwig from Karlsruhe Durlach. If you recall the story of this place, he wanted to have more space for his, little castle in Durlach, just, 10 kilometers to the east of here. They didn't want him. They wanted, to keep the things tidy and small. So he was very unhappy, and he went hunting in the forest here. And on that fateful day, he fell asleep in the middle of the forest. And then he woke up 2 hours later, and he said to his colleagues, I've never had such a great sleep like just here. I'm now going to build my new town here. And that's how Karlsruhe got started in 1719 on my birthday, which goes to show the power of sleep. So if you're tired, go to sleep. Perhaps you might, create a new town or create a new technology. Okay, my name is Matthias Kettemann. I'm a professor in Innsbruck at Innsbruck University. And, since I got bored of AI, I founded an Innsbruck Quantum Ethics Lab, abbreviated Equal Opportunities. I know, fantastic. And on the strength of that, Claudia Reinfrecht from the Austrian Foreign Ministry was kind enough to help nominate me for the for an ethics the ethics committee of United Nations educational of UNESCO of UNESCO. And in UNESCO, we work on quantum computing ethics. So we're developing a draft report. Well, at some point it's going to be a report. Right now it's a draft report on the ethics of quantum computing. And I'm the rapporteur for that. And within the next couple of days, we will submit a second draft to the Secretariat. And I would love to share some of the ideas we've been working on with you and to gather your feedback, if that's okay with you. All right? So I'll present some of the ideas, and then we'll reserve a bit of time for discussion. Now, there are so many different ways to approach quantum ethics. I'll just select 2 or 3 key points that we want to make. So we feel that a key challenge is the question whether or not we can define quantum computing, or at least access to quantum computing resources, as a global commons, as something that the whole world, everybody should have access to. So that's the first question I'd like to ask you, and we can discuss that. Should we define access to quantum compute, so the quantum computing capabilities, to quantum software, to quantum hardware, as something the international community has a responsibility to share with everyone, so that researchers from the global south and the global north have access to the same opportunities all across the world? In other words, is access to quantum computing similar to other global commons, other goods that are shared in the global interest? Yes, with some being some states having a so-called custodial sovereignty over them, like Antarctica. There are a number of states that have made a treaty, the Antarctica Treaty, and they have something called custodial sovereignty. So they manage it in the interest of the whole world with certain principles, like non-military use, freedom of science, things like that. That's applicable to Antarctica. It's applicable to the moon as well. Should we have something like that for quantum computing? And if yes, only for quantum computing, or is there something else? What is it in the technological approach to quantum that needs to be shared, that needs to be protected? Hardware, software, computing, protocols, what is it? And are we in a position to say that already, even as we're still not yet sure on what technological framework quantum computers will run? Will there be poor trapped eons or other beautiful things like photons? Not a quantum physicist, by the way. Right. By the way, how can you tell a worker from a physicist apart? You just ask them to pronounce the word that spells UNIONIZED. The one will say unionized, the other one will say unionized. That's how you tell them apart, Physicists are also workers, by the way, of course, So that's the first question. That goes to the access to quantum computing, okay? The second question we ask ourselves is, so this is the international solidarity question. The second question goes to the temporal dimension. Is there a specific quantum-related duty regarding intragenerational rights? So does the next generation have certain rights towards us, against us, regarding quantum computing and the way that we administer it? This might sound strange, but think about climate change. By now, there are a number of court cases in countries as wide apart as Australia and Germany and Colombia and Ecuador that have enshrined a intragenerational, intertemporal right against climate change. So a dignity-based right of future generations against us as we live now, in order which forces us to be more active in fighting climate change. Is there something to be learned from that for the way that we deal with quantum, the way that we deal with the development of quantum? So how can we ensure that the intergenerational duty, if such a duty exists, is respected? And the third point that I'd like to raise, and I'm more than happy to talk about that later in discussions, or if you feel like putting it into writing, happy to receive an email. What exactly should an ideal recommendation recommend to whom? So UNESCO's mandate addresses states, right? So states obviously will be will play a key role in our recommendation. But who else should be included in this realm of providing the first normative approaches towards quantum? Companies, yes. Organizations, international organizations, probably also. But what roles do they have in the ecosystem, in the emerging ecosystem? We also would like to take a position on the development of standards versus regulation versus principles versus governance. So the question, how So the first quantum-related standards are being developed. NIST has accepted 2 already last year in quantum cryptography. CENELEC is working on standards. STIN is working on standards. So this is right now a phase where the internet was in the 1970s of the last century, namely where standardization is happening. How can we ensure that those standardization processes are more open and more accessible, especially to the global south? Do you think that researchers from the global south have currently access to global standardization processes? Do you know how much it costs to be involved in a DIN process, the CENELEC process? That's expensive, both in time and in money. How can we make sure that those standards which are being set now do not reinforce power structures which we usually see in technology, right? How can we do better? And since you mentioned AI, how can we do it perhaps differently from the way that we're currently governing or not governing AI? The UN is currently working on, vague frameworks of governing AI, and I feel that we're not doing a terrific job. We've also not done a terrific job regulating platforms. Can we do better with regard to quantum? Are we in a position now to provide rules so we don't repeat the mistakes of non-regulating platforms, of not sufficiently regulating AI, especially in light of the fact that companies have a tendency to privatize gains and to socialize costs? How can we do now? How can we do better now? I know, easy questions, and we have now 10 minutes to clarify them all. I'll just write down what you're saying. All right. Thank you so much for allowing me this creative input. Muchas gracias. And I'm eager to hear your little plot. I didn't say anything meaningful. Also, by the way, did you know that this Markgraf, the Markgraf, the one who founded Karlsruhe, was the first one to develop a social security insurance for people working in the church and for teachers? The first one, like 150 years before the Prussian social security law. So, advanced guy. All because he was sleeping enough. Thank you. And super happy to hear online. Oh, where am I? Where's the camera? Yeah. Oh, here. Super happy to hear online comments as well.
Thanks for stepping in. Yeah.
Hi, I have a question that I was immediately thinking when you did talk about the quantum as commons. I would want to know, because for me, I'm a lawyer. So like in general, then I'm not very familiar, but in the UNESCO framework, are there any knowledge or cultural, knowledge resources that would be now seen as commons? Because when I think about quantum declaring that as commons, I think then, well, why not other technologies? Is there really something very special that we need access as commons to? Whereas, for instance, internet, is that, so I want that a bit of clarification.
That's a fascinating question. A fascinating question. Is the internet a global common? I think there's a very strong case to be made that yes, it is. And not only the internet, but the naming architecture resources, the root servers, all of those things which we don't care about because they work. And they work because they are basically in the global commons, and they're being administered by organizations with boring names that you've also never heard of, which is a good thing, because if you haven't heard of it, Donald Trump hasn't heard of them, so he's not going to try to destroy them. That's a great thing. By the way, it's called ICANN. Who has met ICANN? ICANN, yeah, I mean, okay, yeah, you're there. You're too good. Anyway, ICANN is the abbreviation for the Internet Corporation of Assigned Names and Numbers. Boring name, really great. If you want people not to destroy your global resource, give it a boring name. So, on your question, well, there's of course all of the goods which are in the global heritage, right? So the global heritage it's not global commons, but it's similar to it. We have kinetic resources, all of those things that are protected under the UNESCO conventions, and there's also intangible global heritage. For instance, customs can be included in the lists of intangible global heritage, dialect, exactly. Libraries can be included, books. So I think there are cases that can be used as examples. But there's the sky, the moons, the air in a way. Those things are global commons. We all take part of it, Nobody actually owns it. We all have a certain responsibility towards it. But there's no formal list, that includes any technological artifacts we have yet.
From your
In a way, I mean, as technology, I mean, officially, apart from the internet. Yeah.
There's movement making digital technologies parts of it, source AI stuff. It's common, but you said there's no official list. There's no governmentally approved list. This is what we do. But it's all over the place. Right? If you read the Global Digital Compact, you will find the word digital commons.
So it's not
the question of
right.
It's not new. It's an extension of something which is already a concept of internet. The oceans, space, the Arctic are not governed by any states. Yeah. They are common.
The trying to figure out the legal concept. That will be the first knowledge resource that will be officially named as commons by the UNESCO.
Well, by UNESCO, I mean, there is, as Claudia said, in the Global Digital Compact, which is, a very cool document agreed upon by 193 states, where the notion of digital commons appears. So we're not reinventing anything. We're just arguing, I'm just asking the question, should we perhaps include quantum resources, computing power as global commons?
Hello, thank you very much for the thought-provoking questions that you raised in the room. Very interesting. I have to admit, I get the first and the third question. I feel the second one is a bit an odd one out for me. Can you explain a bit why you think, or what's the necessity behind why you think that there needs to be the temporal, how did you call it, a temporal dimension to this technology? Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. So the idea of intergenerational rights is that the people who are not yet born don't really have a standing unless you give it to them. And this is something which has happened over the last 5 years with regard to climate change. A number of different courts, if you think about the Klimaseniorinnen judgment, you would think of the Klimaschutzurteil from the Constitutional Court. You have a strong commitment to extending dignity towards the next generation. And our question is, can we profit from that line of argument? Can we perhaps argue that just as we owe it to the next generation to give them a functioning democratic decision-making space in light of the challenges of social media and the optimization of recommender algorithms towards engagement and not other social goods like cohesion, does it perhaps make sense in light of those challenges to do better with regard to quantum technology and argue that, well, of course, not only quantum, but any advanced frontier technology has to be given a governance framework that ensures that we're not seeing a repeat of the errors of platform governance, namely the ability, that states basically slept for 20 years and allowed private actors to become enormously wealthy. I mean, have you looked at the market capitalization of the biggest tech companies? Well, they extracted value from our data and our attention over the last 20 years, and now they're screaming if you try to regulate them a tiny bit. Do we really want a repeat of that for the quantum world? We don't we? Do we?
Me? Okay. Yeah, sorry, it just feels weird and nothing is getting louder and speaking the mic. Thank you very much for your thoughts. Maybe just like two thoughts of mine to that. One thing is like the discussion about like, should we make something common? We are having trouble defining quantum computing and quantum internet. I think it's very hard, in general, it's very hard to define something in a legal sense, even if you know or you think you know what it is. So I think a first step needs to be that we start developing a terminology, and a terminology what we're talking about. If we specifically look at the governance level, then we see that we have, for example, a huge mix up between quantum communication, communication networks, satellites, and quantum computing. And that we have a mix up between basically a laboratory chip and the satellite tells us how far away we are from a harmonized terminology. I think that needs, in a way, to be a first step. The time
line thinking you just further explained is very interesting to me. I'm just not sure if basically time is the correct factor here, or if we should search for other benchmarks, because the timeline in general is not just insecure, it is also the thing we mostly would like to influence with not sleeping regulation, however, because what we would like to do is to, in a way, balance between mitigation of risks and using the opportunities, and then within the opportunity space, pushing forward on the agenda in an agenda setting function, the things which we think is like valuable or quantum for good. I think it was in Pieter's talk. So I think the question is what facilitates the timeline, and then using these benchmarkings more as the way to orient towards the question of the next generations. Just made 2 cents.
So one final burning question. Or comment.
That was exciting. I was just gonna kind of dump some thoughts. So not really a burning question, so I'm feeling guilty for hogging the mic. But thinking of the intergenerational angle, it seems like there might be some links to the kind of long-termism discussion in philosophy, which I know can be slightly challenging and controversial, but I think it can be very difficult to define future generations and how much rights they should have, and just pointing out that it can be a very thorny topic. The other thing that I wanted to say is the convergence between the intergenerational rights in terms of climate change and quantum computing. So I think one thing that we definitely can and should be doing now is taking early steps to identify what the environmental and climate consequences of quantum computing will be, because it might be that actually that could provide a very strong steer on the direction that the technology development goes down. So that could be something interesting. And then the other thing that I was going to mention was access to quantum compute resource versus access to knowledge about the resource, and having enough knowledge to be able to proactively engage in governance discussions, adopt the relevant kind of cryptographic protections, and also to say, being careful to kind of not lump in post-quantum cryptographic approaches with quantum when we're talking about what the kind of digital commons is. So that wouldn't fall under a quantum technology, but I think it's very, very relevant to think about here.
Just 10 seconds to reply. Or 20 even. I think I have my own mic. So since you mentioned quantum cryptography, it's actually an interesting case study, because there's this saying that every chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Can we afford not to treat access to post-quantum cryptography as a global commons? Can we really afford not to do that? Can we afford not to try to develop quantum key distribution protocols that are not open? Because do we really want to keep that just for a select few? And what would be the consequences? I would feel that quantum cryptography is actually a point that makes some of the arguments we've had here stronger.
Yeah.
So thanks for that. Thank you so much. Thanks, guys. Thanks.
Okay, so hi, I'm workforce number 160217. So when we talk about capacity building, it's oftentimes about skills that we need. It's about, missing numbers, missing headcounts. We're missing so and so many people until 2030. It's about national security interests. It's about how do we keep the knowledge we need, or we think is important for our national security inside our borders. And while I believe all those are relevant questions, I would like to make the argument here that capacity building is about more than just curricula and more than just projections of the potential future workforce development, but it's also, and maybe even more, about giving people or giving the workforce that you want to develop a purpose for learning. for acquiring those skills. With this, well, I guess rather lengthy introduction, I would like to introduce myself shortly. I'm Alex. I am president of PushQuantum, and I would like to introduce to you what we are doing at PushQuantum, because I think this might be very interesting for you in terms of capacity building as well as a voluntary organization. Maybe what we do reflects on what motivates students to actually get engaged with quantum. Let's start with some quick facts about PushQuantum. If I had to put into one sentence what PushQuantum really is, it would be, I would say, we are a community of quantum enthusiasts. I'll just quickly run through some quick facts before we get to what we're actually doing. We are a Munich-based student initiative, so we are run by students for students. We are an independent organization, and we are officially registered under German law. We do have about 100 active members and about 350 members in the wider network. We are open to members from various, from all fields, but we do have, obviously, we are a bit skewed towards the tech side. And finally, and I think that's where it starts getting interesting for you, we were founded in 2020 by students that believed that there is a certain gap between what they're learning in classroom and what they actually need in the real world. So if I had to answer, if I had to say, why do people join PushQuantum, I would say it's more or less, broadly speaking, for 3 different reasons. The first of them is, well, or the first type of new joiners, I would say, is more of a career-oriented type. So they're interested in getting exposure to industry, to academia, to get into contact with companies, with researchers. They're interested in getting education on entrepreneurship. And finally, they do get some valuable skills into project management and leadership as well at PushQuantum. On the other side, we do have idealists joining, people that care about responsible quantum innovation, that want to educate the public, that want to spread awareness on quantum, that care about sustainability, about how we can make quantum innovation more responsible. And finally, we also do have this, well, I guess, somewhat middle ground type of joiners that join to become part of the community of peers that are just fascinated by the same type of technology. Now, to visualize what I just told you in broad terms, I brought you some spotlights on projects we had, and if anything of this is interesting to you, happy to answer more questions either after my talk or in private. Our founding project has been the Quantum Entrepreneurship Lab, which is a course where students solve real-life problems that are given to us by, in the past it have been companies. Now we have switched to getting problems more from an academic side and trying to take those problems that we get and put them into, well, something that might eventually end up being a startup or a venture. So our Quantum Entrepreneurship Lab was focused on this entrepreneurial education. We do have a pretty popular company visit series where we visit, we are a Munich-based company, Munich-based association. So we usually around Munich we visit companies that are based in Munich to learn about what is actually going on in quantum besides or beyond the theory that is taught in classrooms. We do have we often like to invite leaders, thought leaders from or somewhat connected to the quantum ecosystem to get into contact and conversation with us. We do have a quite successful, it is one of our most popular offerings, exchange program with the ETH Zurich, where students from Zurich visit us in Munich, where students from Munich go to Zurich to visit and to experience the quantum ecosystem there for a weekend, which we are currently looking into broadening and also looking into other European hubs to expand this exchange program into. We also have a quantum hackathon. And finally, we are very proud to be part of a large-scale research grant funded by the German Ministry for Education and Research, which, however, will be the topic of its own talk on Wednesday by my colleague Emily. So I will not spoil anything that she might say then. Okay, so now that we have looked into those spotlights, I think my main message here is, if you really want to build a quantum force, you should look into what the quantum force wants. And if you want to see what the quantum force wants, look at what people do in their free time. Look at what people actually, well, invest their free time into when engaging with quantum, to really see what is important to them. And I think this is where the highlights that I just presented you might get interesting for you. Now, we did not conduct a large-scale research. This is mostly based on my own observations, and, well, it's not really interviews, it's just conversations with other PushQuantum members I had. But if I had to nail down 5 keywords or 5 aspects that do motivate students to engage with quantum even in their free time voluntarily, I think it's those 5 points. It's curiosity, it's real-world impact, agency, community, and being part of something big. Curiosity, I think, is oftentimes seems to be overlooked when designing this kind of curricula. But I think this is what actually drives most people to even get started with studying physics, with studying technologies. Real-world impact, I think this is what we see in our entrepreneurship education programs, in our company visit series, that our members, that we want to see what actually is the impact that quantum technologies might have. It's about agency. I think we're seeing here that students, that we as the new generation want to co-create what is happening in the quantum tech sector. Then it's, of course, about community. I think you cannot build quantum capacity without giving your quantum workforce some sort of some forum to connect and to exchange. And finally, and this might be the most important point for many people, it's just this feeling of being part of something big, be it in an important research organization, be it founding a startup, but just being in this pioneering phase that we are in of quantum tech at the moment. And with this, I'd like to thank you for your attention. If you have any thoughts how we might work together, I think I explained what we are interested in. We are always very interested to get connected with the outside world. So please get in contact, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Questions? Sorry.
Thank you. One question is about what you learned in the classroom regarding what we're discussing here. So to what extent did you, in your studies and what you've heard from your fellow students, learn about responsible research innovation and any of the other dimensions that we've discussed here? Thanks.
So I think the short answer would be nothing. It's not really part of the standard curriculum, at least at our university, which is, I think, the gap that we are filling here with PushQuantum. So I think we would not have that many projects focused on responsibility and sustainability if it was, as a more important part of the curriculum.
Next question is why?
Mm-hmm. Why? I think I'm probably not the right person to answer. I can only guess. I guess it has always been part of, well, the German academic system that degrees are geared towards building, towards educating professionals in the field and towards educating specialists. But yeah, this is just me guessing. Also very happy to hear other thoughts on this question, by the way, if there's anyone.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I'm curious about the what moves people to actually pursue difficult topics. And you mentioned curiosity, but so I am running a community. It's a quantum security and defense working group, and actually it's the same. Like my question is always, how do I reach people that do not have yet that curiosity about those topics that from the childhood were defined as difficult, and those to avoid math, physics. And you can say, like, I have a daughter in a primary school, and still math is perceived as a topic for boys and difficult. It's still framed like that with words. So nothing has changed in the 30 years since I've been in primary school. And with my community, what I observe is that I am reaching people that are already curious. I am constantly writing about physics to people that this or the other way, they are already curious. They see themselves as people that could read something like that. But new technologies and like how to bring the new force will demand a total shift, because we need to reach people that are not having that curiosity. And I would like to hear your opinion, like within the community that you've built in Push, how do you perceive it? What is the mix of people that came to you?
So, I mean, I guess most people that come to us already have this sort of curiosity. Otherwise, they wouldn't join a community that is focused on exactly one technology. But we do engage in this topic within the quantum trauma, within the research grant that I talked about, which is focused on public education. The two approaches we're trying out there are, on the one hand, a more playful interaction with quantum tech. So if you want, if something in your childhood caused the trauma connected with quantum, maybe it makes sense to, well, get back into this childlike, safe space environment where you can try out quantum tech in a more playful manner. And the other thing is connecting quantum with, well, real world impact. So, well, I guess in some sense, generating curiosity by showing how this technology can change their lives. But I think overall, at least, and again, of course, I guess there's always this bias that people that start asking questions about quantum are already somewhat curious. But I think the main point is actually this safe space environment. So if you get into those one-to-one conversations, if you just openly say, hey, I'm a physicist, people just start asking questions. So I think, at least I believe, the curiosity is not really lost. It's more about people are afraid to show that they don't understand something. And I think if you manage to create those open spaces, we can at least, well, give people the feeling that they can live out their curiosity again. I hope that answers your question.
I just want to quickly get back to your question earlier about the RRI education in masters such as the one at TUM. I think that the short answer is simply because it's difficult. It's difficult to set up courses about this given by teachers who feel confident addressing these questions. At least from my perspective, my colleagues, at least my physicist colleagues, don't feel empowered to address such questions because they don't think they have any meaningful answer, and they would be afraid to be put on the spot during a lecture. Also, I think they just want to teach as much as they can about their topic and their subject because it's a hard enough task in itself. That would be my 2 cents.
So we have one last question. Let's look on the watch. Fabienne was already wanting to say something.
Yeah, maybe just in addition, I think also back to the education, so it's the perfect bridge. I think what the TUM did, so for the TUM I can explain. So what the TUM did was that they were adapting the HFP, which is now the TUM School of Social Science and Technologies. And there the students can take all different kinds of courses on like AI policy, responsible AI, responsible quantum, etc. The problem is the amount of courses is not super high. And I know that because I probably together with my colleagues teach 90% of these courses at the TUM. For a lot of study programs, the students from the natural sciences have to take between 5 and 9 ECTS in social science. So they can choose what they want to do, but they have to do something within social science. Depending on the faculty, economy is counted as social science. So in theory, it's very much up to the students if they want to learn something in their programs. Logistically, most of the natural sciences are in Garching in Munich. So if everything goes smoothly, 40 minutes by a subway. Most of the time, not everything goes smoothly. So also the logistics are a reason there. I would say we see growing interest. We have also in the political science and politics and technology as degree, and we have a lot of double students. So students who take like, I don't know, computer science, math, physics as one study program, and then in parallel study in part-time at least political science and technology. So I would say specifically at the TUM, there is a transition, but I would also agree to the point of like the people feeling comfy, because the problem is I, for example, have 5 degrees. I studied math and computer science and physics and political science, and then I started teaching these subjects. And it's still hard to teach these subjects. It's changing. It's not a subject where you can just like go on with like your material from the year before, because there were too many changes and you missed too many points. So long story short, I think the hurdles in the bureaucracy are high. Then you would also have to cut something out. So the universities try to offer this in a parallel way, but this then gets to be also logistically very complicated for the students on the other hand, and very time intensive. Plus coming to the fact that Munich is a super expensive city. So most of my students also work. So what I can see is like that for example, we have in the lab a lot of students having 2 degrees plus a job, plus being active in the lab. So I would say you have to make some compromises on other parts of your life if you want to do that. And I think we need to find like basically a more coherent way on like integrating this a bit more naturally for the students, but just maybe as another angle at that topic from the same university.
All right. Any feedback on that? No, like I feel we're good. Thanks, Alex, again for your talk. Yeah.
Can you hear me now? No.
Yes, now it works.
Yes. Oh, that's great. And do you see my screen?
We do.
Oh, that's great. So everything's fine.
Everything is fine. Please go ahead.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you for inviting me, even if I'm far away from you. That was really nice this morning. I was not sure I will be able to wake up and sit in front of my computer, but all the talks were great. So thank you very much. For those who were there last year, this is the part 2 of my presentation last year, because I talked about the Sherbrooke Quantum Dialogue project that last year we were at the end of the first year of 3, and today we are at the end of the second of 3 years of that project. So just a little reminder, because if you were there, well, you did a lot of things between those 2 presentations. And if you don't, let me present the ecosystem that created where the project just built in. The project itself created with 3 dialogues, different dialogues, some result, very, very short result, and then what's next for the last and third year of the project. Just a quick word about the ecosystem. I'm from Canada. I'm from Quebec, the French part of Canada. So that's why I speak English weird, even if I'm from Canada. In Quebec, the government created a couple of years ago what they call innovation zone. And one of them was in Sherbrooke and was created around the ecosystem of Institut Quantique, Quantum Institute of Universite de Sherbrooke, the city of Sherbrooke, and of course, a place where government wants the startup and the quantum companies, industries, goes to develop the next quantum computer. We all hope that the next real big universal quantum computer will be built in Sherbrooke. We'll see. With the creation of that innovation zone, the government also created a funding program to force people to work together, I have to say, because le Fonds Stimule was created to force people from different disciplines, of course, but even from different sectors of society to work together. So as you can see, I'm the PI of this research project, les dialogues quantiques, the quantum dialogues. I'm from the Faculty of Social Science and Humanities. I'm a professor of political studies, and my co-PI is Alexandre Blais, the scientific director of l'Institut Quantique from the Sciences faculty. So we try to do something revolutionary and work all together. You can see what kind of partners we can meet around the innovation zone that they call them district. And you can also see at the top of my screen the founding members, where Universite de Sherbrooke, of course, is an important partner of that creation. So as you can see, the fund is from 2023 to 26. So we are a little bit more than halfway to that social science research project. So like I said, the project is created around 3 different dialogues. The first one is a local one. So all the partners or the groups implicated in the innovation zone of Sherbrooke. So from October 23, we bring together every 2 months around 20 persons who represent all those organizations, and they come to talk with us about how they imagine, how they can anticipate what kind of change the integration of a quantum computer could bring to our society. Well, in that case, we mostly talk about what it can bring to Sherbrooke City, but of course we cannot just look at Sherbrooke when we talk about that kind of disruptive technology. So every 2 months, all those groups, all those organizations set together. So quantum industries, government, in that case, there's only one government because the innovation zone is around the city of Sherbrooke. Some institution, education institution, of course, and also a group, civil society groups. We bring together economics group, environmental groups, cultural group, and also women, because, well, when you look at literatures about the impact of disruptive technologies, those are the groups, or those are the team that are frequently mentioned in the literature. And of course, in that case, the only research community that is part of that dialogue is Universite de Sherbrooke. From now, we had 11 meetings. The next one, the last one of this second year, will be held at the beginning of next June. And next year, we will hope that we will be able to bring all those people together again 6 another times. So just to show you, I wasn't sure I was supposed to present some kind of data about bringing from all those dialogues, and I choose to show you some word clouds. I think you say that in English, right? Nuage de mots in French, so I guess it's, if I directly translate, it's word cloud. Of course, you can see that those words are in French because this local dialogues, it's take place in French. But I just want to show you to bring your attention around some of the words that represent what they usually talk about, all those people. You see the orange word are the words that are most frequently present, said, or part of the conversation. And I think those are very interesting because you see words, you see verbs of action, you know, you can see think, have, do, and how do, related to quantum and related to the world. Of course, it is a local dialogue, and all those people have consideration for their city, for their industries, for their groups, for the members they represent. But they cannot just cut off the rest of the world from their consideration. And even if we oriented them to think about what kind of impact it could bring to Sherbrooke city, they always do parallel with other cities or other countries, or even, well, the whole world. If you look around the orange word, you see the medium words, and you see the same kind of question. So we question the time, they question the time. The time question are regularly raised. You know, when will we be able to see exactly what is coming around the quantum computer? When we'll be able to know exactly what the computer will be able to do and what kind of impact it could have, what kind of responsibility that possibilities will bring, and the actors that are central to all those discussions are frequently policies. Well, the politics that can do public policies around that kind of new technologies, and of course, companies. So those are really the actors that are considered by the participant to have the more direct responsibilities, policies and companies. If I switch to the other dialogue, the second dialogue, the national dialogue. So we do exactly the same. We bring together, but not every two months, because Canada is a large country. So twice a year, we bring together same actors, same kind of actors, but on the national level. So we bring together governments from 4 provinces of Canada and the federal government. We're bringing together also quantum industries. In that case, we can add more research communities. So we bring together researchers from the same 4 provinces and the same civil society groups that represent same interests, like women, environment, and culture, and economic, of course. And we do the same exercise with them. So we ask them to anticipate what can come with the creation of a universal quantum computer. And we had 2 meetings at the time, and the third one, so right in the middle of that project, the third one will be held also at the beginning of June. The first one was in presence, the second one was online, because again, it's a large country, and the third one will be in present at the other side of the country, so in British Columbia. Same thing, though, that the dialogue is, we take the dialogue, we take the conversation in English, mostly in English, because we have people from 4 provinces. But same thing, you see that the orange word are the word that are more frequently pronounced and used by the participant. So you see something very similar about the way that companies are central actor of that ecosystem. So maybe before, I think it was Matthias who was asking, why are we not doing a global good of quantum computing? Well, I think there's kind of an answer here. So companies are really, really, really important actors for that ecosystem. But you can see also that the action verb are important. Think about what can be coming on and going in a real world, what's going to change, what's going to happen. Of course, you can see also that in the black other medium words, that you can see also the same kind of actors, same kind of action that start, question, and companies also that are still, and the government. You can also see the government. So very similar actors, very similar verbs, even if we don't speak exactly about the same level of implementation and not exactly the same theme of consideration. Let's move to the third dialogue, and I will close with this one, the last one. Between those two dialogues, the one from local level and the other one from the national level, we do interviews, individual interviews with local entrepreneurs that work in the innovation zone of Sherbrooke, 3 professors, 3 PhD students, and we try to talk with them about what we discuss in those two dialogues and see if it sounds like something they could relate on. Could they bring or take the conversation, the discussion, the reflection of those two dialogues and put that in action in their innovation action or in their research action. The results at that time are a little bit different. Of course, you can see that the research right now is taking a lot more space, because even in the innovation zone, the entrepreneurs are still working on research kind of orientation. So they're not exactly in the commercialization phase of that development. So of course, they're still doing research. And you can see also that you have very close action verbs, have, do, think. So that's exactly the same kind of reflection they have, what we should do, what society should do, and what they, as entrepreneurs or researchers, must do. Another interesting thing is that if you look at the bigger black words around the orange words, you can also see that there's government, government and politics. So you don't see companies as a central actor as it were in the 2 other dialogues, but you can see that politics, the responsibility of government in that case, is still an important part of that third dialogue. And you can also see that in the lower part of the round, you have confidence, and that's great, because in the other dialogues we talked a little about confidence, even if there was very different actors, but that's the researcher and the entrepreneurs who talked the more about the confidence that needed. Of course, they're not always on the same page for that. What kind of confidence? Sometimes they think about confidence in science, and sometimes they think about confidence in politics. Not sure about this one. And confidence from the population to the science. So this is very interesting to see that it's in that third dialogue that the question of confidence raised. I think I'm already done. So very quickly, we are at the end of the second year, like I said. We still have 1 year to go. So something like 2 interviews with entrepreneurs and researcher, 2 meeting on the national level. The last one will be in Ottawa, in the capital of Canada, and the 6th meeting for the local dialogue. That will be at the end of all this. We should be able to do some training tools and do, of course, scientific advice for the Canadian government at least, but maybe if we can share with Europe, right, Pieter? Maybe we can share with Europe. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Isabelle. There's some applause in the room. While we prepare for the next session, is there one very short question? I feel everything was said. Thanks, Isabelle. And yeah, see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Approach to ethics with technological maturity, with a specific stage of a technology's development. So in a nutshell, what I will be telling you, I will first introduce, of course, the notion of ethics readiness, which I define as the readiness of a technology to undergo detailed ethical scrutiny. And the underlying idea is that a technology, as it further develops, will allow over time for more specific ethical analysis. So ethical readiness of a technology, the ethics readiness of a technology, will evolve, will increase as a technology matures. So at the earliest stages of technology development, ethics readiness of a technology is typically low. And when ethics readiness is low, I will argue that a so-called meaning-oriented approach to ethics is most appropriate. Whereas as a technology further develops and ethics readiness increases, outcomes-oriented ethics becomes more appropriate and also more urgent. So based on this idea, I will argue that we cannot be too early or too late with ethics in general. It's never too early or too late for ethics, but we can be too early or too late with a certain kind of ethics, with certain ethical questions. So I will work towards that statement in 3 steps. First, I will introduce the problem of uncertainty as really the core challenge of early stage ethics, of upstream ethics. I will then distinguish between 2 main approaches to upstream ethics, which are called the outcomes-oriented and the meaning-oriented approach. And I will then introduce the notion of ethics readiness and argue why it is important to align how we approach ethics with a technology stage of development. That's the theoretical stuff, and I will try to make it a little bit more concrete by applying this framework to quantum technologies and see what the implications are of the concept of ethics readiness. So first, the problem of uncertainty. If we think about the innovation process or the development of technology in terms of a stream, take the stream as a metaphor, the ethics of new and emerging technology is ethics at a very upstream moment in that stream. So we can call it upstream ethics, early stage ethics. And upstream ethics generally aims to anticipate outcomes in order to effectively direct these outcomes into a desirable direction. Now, this anticipatory ambition of upstream ethics is always confronted with this problem of uncertainty. Technology development is surrounded by many uncertainties about how it will materialize, if it will materialize, when it will materialize, and if it materializes, what the implications of this materialization will be. So this is, of course, nothing new. And over the last years, maybe even the last decades, a lot of methods have been proposed to somehow deal with this problem of uncertainty. In fact, there have been more than 30 methods developed to address this epistemological knowledge-related problem, with none of them emerging as dominant. So it is currently unclear when each approach or when each method is best applied. So I thought there was a gap to address. So in order to assess when each method can be applied most effectively to deal with this problem of uncertainty, I think it's a first helpful step is to distinguish between two main approaches to upstream ethics, the outcomes and the meaning-oriented approach. Now, methods aligning with the first approach, outcomes-oriented ethics, they focus on assessing the possible outcomes of a future technology. So they imagine how the future could look like, and they assess this possible future. So they engage with possible futures. And often that, that takes shape in the form of scenario thinking. So these methods under the header of outcomes ethics always employ some type of ethical foresight analysis, which is a very appealing approach because it creates the content for ethical analysis, right? But it has also been criticized mainly for becoming too speculative. Because if we are going to imagine possible futures, we have to rely on many assumptions, and that can make ethical analysis quite shaky. So the other main approach that I see is meaning-oriented ethics. And meaning-oriented ethics focuses not on assessing possible futures, not on assessing outcomes, but on assessing the process of how we attribute meaning to a technology in the way we think, talk, dream about technologies. So instead of engaging with possible futures, meaning-oriented ethics engages with the future as it already exists in the form of our hopes and expectations and visions of a technology. So meaning-oriented ethics assesses these images we have of a technology. And this approach is way less vulnerable to the critique of becoming too speculative, because it doesn't speculate, it focuses on what is already there. But this approach can only take us so far, because at some point it will become urgent to anticipate possible outcomes if we want to address them effectively early on. So these approaches both deal with the problem of uncertainty, and they both have their strengths and limitations in doing so. But this problem of uncertainty is not a static problem. It is something that evolves as the technology matures. And this brings us to the idea of ethics readiness. And the idea that the problem of uncertainty changes or transforms as the technology develops becomes more clear if we look at the widely used technology readiness level scale. It will be familiar to most of you. And this scale distinguishes between 9 levels of technology development, which we can roughly categorize into 3 phases. So the discovery phase, development phase, and the deployment phase. And in these 3 phases, the uncertainties surrounding a technology change. So in the discovery phase, the uncertainties are most numerous and profound, whereas the technology will become more specific and more concrete in the later stages. So also the scope, but also the nature of the uncertainties that surround it will change. Now, I think it will be very useful to add an ethical dimension to this widely used technology readiness scale. And that brings us to the notion of ethics readiness, which again I define as the readiness of a technology to undergo ethical scrutiny. And the underpinning idea is thus that ethics readiness of a technology will evolve, will increase as technology progresses to higher TRLs. So then we can distinguish between a low, a mid, and a high ethics readiness of a technology, roughly corresponding to the 3 phases of technical development. And based on the idea, on the respective strengths and limitations of the 2 approaches to ethics that I just discussed, I think there's an argument to make that the meaning-oriented ethics is most appropriate when ethics readiness is lowest. So when the uncertainties are very fundamental, because this approach, as we just saw, is best positioned to deal with these very fundamental uncertainties. While the outcomes-oriented ethics gains relevance and momentum as a technology takes shape more concretely. Yeah. So let's see what the implications are of this framework of ethics readiness. And if we want to apply it to quantum technologies, the first thing that immediately becomes clear is that it is important to not speak about quantum technology in the singular, but in the plural, quantum technologies. Because different quantum technologies, and I think we can roughly distinguish between those three, sensors, computers, and communication, they are situated at different levels of technology readiness. So sensors are at a mid or even high TRL, while computers and communication are still in a fundamental research phase, which situates them at a low TRL. Now, based on the idea that the level of technology development has implications for how appropriate a certain approach to ethics is, we could say that for sensors, it is possible to take an outcomes-oriented approach to ethics, to focus on assessing possible outcomes, possible futures, because the technology is already quite tangible. Whereas for the computers and the communication, it makes more sense to adopt a meaning-oriented approach, focus on assessing the visions around these technologies. And this is a relevant insight, I think, because the discussion around ethics and quantum technologies, in my view, often focuses and maybe over-focuses on assessing impacts, whereas the investigation of visions will be very, especially in this phase, very relevant, because visions do influence how a technology further develops. So, in conclusion, I propose the idea of ethics readiness as the readiness of a technology to undergo detailed ethical analysis, and the ethics readiness of a technology evolves as the technology matures, which implies that the appropriateness of how we approach ethics, how we do ethics, also shift in the life cycle of technology development. So this perspective addresses and helps us to move beyond the dilemma between being too early or too late, because we cannot be too early or too late with ethics, but we can be too early with certain types of ethical questions. So we can be too early with outcomes-oriented ethics, and we can be too late with meaning-oriented ethics. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
5 minutes. So we have 5 minutes for questions. Thank you very much for that talk. I think you were first, and then we'll see.
Thank you. Yeah, really nice talk. I really enjoyed it. I've also thought about ethics readiness levels before, but in the maybe thinking more in the context of kind of actions. So this was really interesting. I had a few thoughts. So firstly, how do you see the distinction between the kind of meaning versus outcome and a deontological versus a consequentialist approach to ethics? Because it sounds like there might be some similarities there.
Yeah, so I think consequentialist ethics, of course, falls within the scope of outcomes-oriented ethics. But I chose to call it outcomes-oriented ethics and not consequentialist ethics, because I think, but in non-ethics papers, sometimes the two are conflated. Mm-hmm. But outcomes-oriented ethics is not per se consequentialist in the sense that it only looks at the biggest happiness for the most people. It just focuses on impact, on outcomes, and it doesn't take this consequentialist principle per se. So consequentialism is part of outcomes-oriented ethics, but not the other way. Not not necessarily.
Necessary, but not sufficient. Yeah. Can I sneak in one more small comment? Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll catch you later. Yes, yes, please. Okay, so I go here and here because I don't know who was first.
Thanks for the talk, and it's great. But I was wondering, maybe it's a similar point. How clearly can you distinguish these two types of analysis? It seems that the one needs the other. What? If you want to consider the narratives about what a quantum computer can do, you have to create outcomes. You have to come up with worlds where that quantum computer is used. And if you do just a meaning, often you would say, well, I don't want to live in that world, which is described by all the fissions you have collected. And that seems to be outcome tools. So in short, how close can you?
Well, I think, good point. Thanks for raising it. I think, first of all, it's a matter of emphasis or focus. So I think in a meaning-oriented ethics, a typical method is vision assessment, and that really focuses on something different than, for example, scenario thinking or other methods, or more the technology assessment methods. So first, I think it's a matter of focus, and I'm not really interested in where the exact line between these two approaches is. But your point about we have to somehow generate input for these visions in order to assess the visions. Yeah, that's a good point. My question back would be, is that the task of an ethicist or the ethics community, or because there will always be groups in society who will be thinking about the future of a technology, be it researchers or companies. So I think my argument is mostly focused on what the task is of ethicists, and I'm not sure whether at this point I would be inclined to say that it is the ethics community who should be thinking up these possible futures, but rather take a step back and look at the hermeneutic process of how we attribute meaning to these technologies. But it's a good point. Thanks.
I find it an interesting approach and really new thinking in a sense. I wasn't quite sure whether I understood you correctly, where you said with the vision thing, we deal with futures as they exist. I think it's thought out futures. It's not existing futures, right? And the other question is, probably one shouldn't just group it as sensors, computers, and communication, but look into each individual sensor types or sensor class if one does this kind of thing.
Yeah, so the latter point, I think that's a very valid point. Maybe it's necessary to make even more distinctions between different types of quantum technologies. And the first, maybe it's not meant so literally, but if I say meaning-oriented ethics focuses on the future as it already exists in the form of visions. So it's of course not, the future never exists now, of course, but these ideas about a technology, they do exist actually. Or well, that's also a philosophical question, yeah.
So since we're at ITAS, I'm obligated to remind that we actually have something called hermeneutical TA. And I think you would benefit from comparing a bit with the differences of hermeneutical TA and, meaning-oriented ethics.
So I'm familiar with that work and with vision assessment and with this literature. I just try to come up with overarching approaches. So these are all methods, I think, and I just distinguish between two main approaches. But in my paper here, I discuss all these different approaches, including hermeneutic technology assessment.
I checked the paper.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Eline. We are at the end of the time. So we have to move on to our next talk. So, Wenzel, it's your stage, 15 minutes for you.
Thank you. Also, thank you very much, Eline, for the introduction to futures and visions and everything. In my talk, I'm going to throw this around a little bit because I think I'm doing the same, two of the things that you separated at the same time. But no matter what, I think it's a good introduction, and it's also a good thing to keep thinking forward. So my name is Wenzel Mehnert. Usually there would be a slide here with some text of my background. I have a background in cultural studies and in future studies, working at the Austrian Institute of Technology and working in the field of, well, technology foresight. What I'm interested in is very much how we envision futures with new technologies. So I'm moving somewhere in between what we heard this morning from Pieter about responsible innovation, what we heard from Eline just now, and then also what we heard from Ignacio about conversations and how they shift when it comes to technologies. So what you would also see here is a title that says Quantum Visions, an example for a boring future. And you can see this as a provocative statement, but I will also explain to you what I mean with a boring future, as this talk is more about finding or defining a concept, namely the concept of boring futures, and I use quantum technologies as an example. So first, I'm going to talk about what are visions, what are technologies, and what is the future, what are futures. Then I'm going to give a short example of a workshop that we've done here together with Zeki and Adrian in this room, actually just a few months ago. And then I'm going to talk a bit about this concept of boring futures, which is an idea that I took with me after the workshop and I'm trying to explore it further. First step is this talk. Second step will be a paper. So if any of you has an idea that might be helpful to contribute to this idea here that I'm presenting, just throw it my way. Again, this is very much work in progress. Okay, so let's start with the first thing. What are visions? In future studies, we differentiate between many different forms of futures. Basically, what we say is there's not one future, but there are many futures that we already have in the present. And we can observe them because they're part of a discourse that we're talking about. Visions are a very particular form of futures. Namely, it's a form of future that is expressing a preferable or a desirable futures. It answers the question of how does, here in this case, technology, make the world a better place, and how does this world look or feel like? And with this better, of course, what we have is certain values that are inscribed in these visions. As Eline said before, those visions also guide the actions of the developers. So if this is the vision where I want to go to, I develop the technology so that it allows me to achieve this future world that I have in mind. Futures are usually used as a strategic component, and here I'm referring to the literature on vision assessment that is coming from the KIT-ITAS. So different companies or different players, actors, use visions to communicate hopes or fears. Well, with visions, usually hopes. They use them to align actions of different actors to achieve this one world that we're envisioning here, to create alliances, but of course also to create attention through so-called hypes. When you want to break down visions or of techno-futures, you can say they are usually very easy narratives that say if a certain thing happens, if the technology is here, then this will be the impact of that. To give you a brief example, this is a talk from Regina Dugan, by Regina Dugan. Regina Dugan was working for Facebook, to be more precise, in a company or sub-company of Facebook called Building 8, and she was working on a brain-computer interface for Facebook. And their vision was so you can see it over there, so what if you could type directly from your brain? Their vision was, if we have a device that can read my thought, then I can communicate directly with each other. I do not need to use thumbs to type a message into the smartphone, and I do not need to use something that they call here imprecise language. This vision holds some values, for example, a value of faster communication and rising efficiency. It also has this value of using a higher bandwidth because they are basically understanding language as a very low bandwidth that allows me to, because I always need to translate my thoughts into words and so on. Super interesting talk. I recommend it to watch it. What is not reflected in those visions are topics like privacy and data security. And also it's not reflected if this technology is actually feasible and if the vision is actually creatable and so on. But this does not matter for a vision, because a vision is not about criticizing it. A vision is about creating an ideal world where we want to go, because then certain users can align with it. As Eline also said, what we as ethicists could do then is take those visions and critically reflect on it. To give you another example here, this is on the literature of Leitbilder, which is a German term for visions. And here he defines as a general idea or as a desirable future, albeit technically imprecise. So those visions do not need to be precise. They are not reflections of an actual technology, but rather how the world changes because of that. All right. So this is the theoretical set. Let's look into quantum visions. When I asked GPT, what people do nowadays, how does a quantum technology vision look like? It gives you the following example. What we see here is the city of the future. And with city of the future, I mean that you see many icons that are very typical for expressions of the future. Some icons, for example, like the flying car that we have over here, like domes. So ChatGPT, just as we humans also do, is just referring to already images of the future or things that are coined as futuristic in our cultural landscape. What it also does is it throws in some terms like quantum, AI, quantum, something, something, something. It's a very stereotypical image. So if we would reduce all of that, if we would reduce quantum, if we would reduce the iconography of futures, then we would probably end up with a very typical city that we now also know from everyday life. Maybe it's Vienna. I mean, we have a what's called in English? Thank you. We have a wheel over there. So what we did in the workshop that we conducted here was we were bringing together a group of different stakeholders and asked them about what do you think is the future of quantum technologies? Or what is the vision of quantum technology? Again, we're not talking about the downsides, we're talking about what is the most positive thing that can come out of that. We had 15 participants from many different fields, so not only industry, also academia, civil society, and so on. And we had a 2 days workshop. The first day, we spent the whole day in envisioning and working on this vision. And the second day, what we did was we were reflecting this vision and we did a backcasting exercise. So you can say the first day was about identifying where we want to go. And the second day was the question, how can we go there if we've identified? The result looks a bit like that. So this is the common vision that on the morning of the second day, everybody agreed upon. We are in 2045, around about that. Quantum technologies work. And with technologies, I think they're mainly talking about quantum computers. New technologies like quantum computing and sensing are an additional available backend. As an invisible but important infrastructure, it has changed industries and optimized different sectors, leading to, among others, an efficiency increase in various fields. As an enabling technology, it is also followed by new applications. Further, these technological advances have also led to environmental, cultural, and social changes, not only on the national, but also on the global scale. And the pioneers of the field, for example, meaning here companies and countries that supported the development of research early on, are now harvesting the fruits of their efforts. Before I continue, just a brief question. Who would not agree with this statement? All right. So I think everybody is more or less happy with that. Again, it's a vision. So what can we say about that? First, this vision comes from a heterogeneous group of stakeholders. There's no strategic biases in it. It's not Google that comes up with this one, because then you would have way more values and way more directions in there. So it's rather, well, it's the least common denominator that we can all agree upon among different stakeholder groups. It's rather unspecific. So, for example, we have something like social change, and in social change, all of the discussions we had this morning, and also the examples from Tim, for example, with the different use cases, we can see them somewhere there in social change. What's also interesting, we have nothing about quantum mechanics in here. So there's already something that I would call a conversation change, but that you would call a conversation change. And also thinking back 2 years ago, I remember Pieter was here also talking about, we do not need to talk about quantum mechanics, but rather about visions. So this is interesting. And what's important also is we are talking about invisible but important infrastructures. So all of this we presented, we will discuss about, and then one participant says, sounds to me like a boring future. And I found this super interesting. So, because for me, as a future studies, as somebody who's interested in narratives and visions of the future, thank you, I'm wondering, what's boring about that? What is the precise definition of a boring future? So, with this consolidation of a quantum vision, the group was not alone. We also have Luca Pussati, who did a very good article on the hermeneutics of quantum technologies, and basically he confirms this idea. QT appears today as an extension of previous technologies that could significantly enhance or accelerate. It's a problem to find whether QT can bring something truly new, original or current technology landscapes. So he would also agree it's a very boring future. So let's try to define a boring future. I would say boring futures are narratives of the present world plus a new technology that are not disruptive. So we're not talking about neurotech or AI that's changing everything. We are talking about a technology that is continuing everything as it already is, makes it just more efficient. They're usually about infrastructure technologies. That means they only become apparent when they're not working or functioning anymore, as they should be. And in these futures, the technologies and the results remain invisible to the end user. I use here the metaphor of a gene-modified cucumber. It's, of course, something different, but the end user just buys a cucumber in the supermarket. He doesn't really experience or engages with the process of creating it. He only engages with the result. And this creates a challenge for impact assessment because there is no direct impact to assess. Everything continues as it does before. It's just more efficient. And here, I wonder, well, is it a potential challenge for impact assessment? First question mark. And however, I would say the risk of this lies exactly in its boringness. So I'll give you an example of quantum computing. The vision of quantum computing is if we get QC to run, then everything will be more efficient. QC and QT are, as we heard today, at the fringe from the lab to the market. And in this moment, what becomes important is the business model of these technologies. The business model allows to integrate this new technology into the market. The business model of QC is, at the moment, to build platforms. QC accessed through so-called cloud computing. And this cloud computing is based on the time and the amount that people can use it. So it's a question of accessibility, which we also heard from Matthias Kettemann today. The benefit of cloud computing is, of course, everybody can use it, theoretically, without need to build the machines. The risk, however, is that the technology accumulates power in the hands of a few group of people. And on a geopolitical scale, we have this discussion on quantum supremacy. Usually it's US versus China and Europe somewhere in between. And we have this discussion of the quantum divide. And we use this framework as a focus to assess quantum computers. And I would like to now bring a different perspective, namely to understand quantum computer as a platform business, not social media, but rather as a platform. And I want to point out here that when we're talking about infrastructures, so a boring future, talking about infrastructures, that what's happening with quantum computers is that this rising digitalization of everything means also privatizing sensible infrastructures and creating a shift of power to tech developers. So, and with this, I want to come to the recent and offer maybe new perspectives on quantum computing, namely perspectives that come from exactly the critique on platform economies, platform capitalism, as Zniszek called it 2016, where he says that digital companies organize societies by controlling the infrastructures or by recreating infrastructures around their digital solutions. Cory Doctorow, the science fiction author and also tech critique, talks about end-shitification, which means that a platform turns into, shit, through a predictable profit-driven cycle, and it usually goes like that. At the very beginning, they bring in a lot of users. In the second step, they bring in businesses because they already have a lot of users. And in the third step, business and users have become so dependent on the platform that they just change everything. So they their own benefit from. And last but not least, the recent changes in the US America that we saw around the, I call here tech fascism and oligarchy. What we see is that the organization of sensitive infrastructures is transferred to private companies, and those private companies are super political, as we can see. All of them on the top right, you see Mark Zuckerberg, Bezos, Pieter and Elon Musk. All of them were at the inauguration of Donald Trump. And of course, you all know the iconic picture from Elon Musk. This is my 15 minutes. Yes. Thank you very much. So last slide, remaining question is, seeing from this perspective, looking at quantum computing from a platform critique perspective, my question would be, how can we avert the risk of power shift? Might European sovereignty in QT be the answer to that? And of course, we can ask, wait, is this really boring? And you can also ask the question of maybe there are some different perspectives on it. Anyways, I will end that. Thank you very much. And again, if you have any contributions, please send them my way.
Questions, because we always have 5 minutes for questions. Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, thank you for the nice talk. It's probably a bit more common, maybe it's a question, I'm not sure. When you showed the vision that you had there, the text written down, I would have probably an alternative explanation why it seems like a boring future, because I think besides invisible and maybe infrastructure, this is very generic. I think you could swap out quantum technologies and put in any name of just like there's a new technology, it could work, and then the rest would probably stay in large parts the same, right? You have global scale, you have social change, environmental, cultural, social change. So I think if you would have a more concrete vision of how it would look like, or more examples or applications where you could imagine as someone who reads this, okay, this is how it probably would feel like to live in this quantum technology future, it would be probably less boring. So it's a bit provocative, and I wonder what you're going to say to that.
I agree in parts. I could see that when we're talking about cultural and social changes and technology does that, fine. I think what is exactly important about this and what is unique, I would say, to quantum technologies is exactly what you break it out, namely the, I think in the workshop themselves, they were talking about an invisible backbone, a metaphor that I found even more stronger, but it remains the same. We are talking about a technology that replaces current infrastructure processes. And we are also talking about giving up this infrastructure to somebody else, because quantum computing is not feasible without cloud computing. And this is something we need to keep in mind when talking about quantum computing and when talking about the future of quantum computing. And I feel, maybe again, I'm mistaken, I feel that this would be something that when we're talking about conversation shifts, there's something that is not talked about. And we should talk about it more. Again, maybe I just don't see it in the discourse or again, but then please send it.
Yes, I'm right. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for your interesting talk. And of course, I see many similarities and yeah, it really resonates with me. I was wondering, and I don't know if I understood it correctly, but do you mean that because quantum visions around quantum are boring in a way because they continue what we are already doing? So are you arguing that non-disruptive technologies require an alternative approach to how we do technology assessment? Because I would be curious if you could expand on that a bit more. Why do we need a different approach for disruptive or non-disruptive technologies?
Exactly. This is what I'm arguing as well. I think there are many arguments on a different layer. I feel that talking about disruptive technologies makes it easier for technology assessment to work, because we can look at the impacts and then we can create dilemmas, for example, and we can see of how would you, what is the change that comes with it, and how might you evaluate this change? And then you can do, I don't know, citizen engagement activities, for example, talk about their values, or you can put a bunch of philosophers on it and they can see what's better or not. I think this process is not so easy with non-disruptive technologies, because the non-disruptiveness of technologies hides away the actual change that is happening. It is something that is not apparent on first sight. That would be my argument for the what I here call boring futures. Boring futures are basically non-disruptive futures that just continue everything as it is, and then you think, well, okay, it's hard for me to find something to critique here or to reflect upon.
See, there is a lot of interest, but we have just time, I think, for one more question.
Okay.
Here, so Ignacio, Adrian, right? I'm sure you all have to find him on, but it's okay. I can help corner.
So it was a really nice talk, and I think my comment or question follows on from where you were going, I think, and so on. And I think here is you've got a common vision, and this is really the non-disruptive part of it. And it comes from the fact you've got a committee of, 12 people, and you found what they had in common. Of course, actually, if you're looking for the disruptive part, what you probably need to take is all the wacko parts of the discussion where, you had no agreement. And probably one of those actually describes a path which is going to happen. But of course, good luck trying to guess which one it is. So, and I think that's, that one of the things is that, to come up with a common vision of the non-disruptive development, you've got it. You've got a description of socially what will happen, but it's missing the bit which is probably transformational. So,
I think this is already transformational. It is just not disruptive on the first sight. And I agree with you. Maybe to give this a little bit more context, before this statement created, we had, 60 different statements of how quantum technologies might actually do those little changes. This is everything that we can agree upon without talking about we are going to use it for measuring water leaks. We are going to use it to optimize infrastructures or something. So this is like what everybody can agree upon. And then all those nitty-gritty details and the different use cases, they are hidden behind social and cultural changes. 100% agree. Again, this is not looking for the disruptiveness of the technology. This is more about finding the least common ground. And then we end up with a very, I would say, non-disruptive future. But you can still work with that because it highlights the sensibility of the whole topic, namely privatization of infrastructure.
Perfect closing words.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So applause.
Thank you so much. We're already pretty tired and it's pretty late. But I don't know if it's good or bad, but I don't feel necessarily fit that much in this topic, theorizing responsible quantum computing that much. It was more my work that I did before. And I will just kind of shamelessly tell you that I have a publication that's called Regulating Quantum Computers, Insight into Early Patterns and Trends in Academic Regulatory Conversations on the Quantum Revolution. And I encourage you to read it if you want, because that's exactly about how academics in law and other fields that talk about regulation of quantum computing, how they talk about the future and possibilities now, and what kind of values and what kind of conversations exist about it. So anyway, but my second stage of research that I'm presenting today, and that's work in progress, has more to do with, all right, so there are these ideas about the different possible responsible quantum computing principles. In general, responsible research and innovation is not a new concept. It doesn't come with quantum. It has been there before and had to do with other fields as well. And we have a commitment of certain kind in the EU as well to responsible research and innovation. There is this idea that we have to integrate these principles in different fields. And we have also academic translations. We have been listening the whole morning about the initiatives when it comes to the quantum computing. For instance, here we have, I selected this one of the publications because of one of the people who presented already is co-author of this article. It's one of the examples of like 10 principles for responsible research innovation in quantum computing or quantum technology sector. We have these translations. But for me, as a lawyer, I'm a postdoctoral researcher in law in Lund University in Sweden. For me, the interest that I felt is, okay, so what are the possibilities from a legal perspective to put it somehow into the actual development of this technology? Is there anything on policy or normative level that is working already right now to develop this technology in this initial stage in a responsible way, right? Because we can talk about many different things, but from normative, policy, and legal perspective, what is out there? Is there anything at all? We have already talked a little bit about the EU, and I want to focus on the EU level. That I felt is kind of the most interesting to me, because EU wants to position itself as a leader of some sort in the quantum technology, quantum computing in the world. And, what is out there when it comes to responsibility or responsible or ethical or anything like that to do with quantum computing? These are the different strategies that you can find, different policy documents that deal with quantum computing. And I don't need to go very deep into it, but generally, mostly they are focusing on development of quantum, well, as it is described, I think, in the Quantum Declaration, the quantum valley of the world, right? To put money, to put investments, to put different investments in the infrastructure to develop these technologies as far as possible. And that's understandable. We are in very, very early stages of this development. But there's very little really when it comes to other social considerations or other values. Of course, there is a lot of talk about cooperation, education, and so on, because that is necessary to develop this technology. So there are some aspects that we could glimpse, in the 10 principles, for instance. I didn't even go deep into them, but we have talked about them so much. So there are some aspects that are there in the policies. There is the Quantum Declaration that says that member states shall undertake activities to gain deeper understanding of the social and economic impact. So there is some sort of commitment that, yes, of course, we should understand how these technologies work in society, but still the emphasis is on development of the technologies itself. And that is fine. And we know that there is now talk about Quantum Act, maybe, that is coming, perhaps in the nearest future, that maybe will focus on more social consequences of different sorts, but there's still little clarity about it now. So, but then what about law? What about norms? What exists right now? And for that, I also was talking with quite some scientists and those who specifically work in quantum field, in the quantum technologies, quantum computing field. And I asked, what norms do influence your work right now when you develop, the technologies? I said, are there some kind of maybe ethical guidelines in your workplace, that would guide you how you work with these new technologies? And they're like, no, not really. We don't know. What mostly influences us, they said, I got the feedback from others, is for private companies especially, export and import or export restrictions in this case, but in general, the restrictions that exist on moving components, parts, from one country to another, especially if it's ours of the EU. Then there was quite some who said that this is a public procurement law and the conditions of tenders that influence a lot what exactly they're allowed to do, how the technologies are developed, what kind of technologies are encouraged, and so on. Quantum computing, quantum technology sector. But then also quite a lot of opinions that this is also the funding entity that imposes a lot of how and what exactly you can work with when it comes to different grants and different funding schemes, and so on. There are these conditions there that affect the work a lot. And then maybe in the future, standardization, we don't have that much right now in the field of quantum computing or quantum technologies really, but in the future, that could be one of the things. So it is interesting to kind of know, so maybe these are the fields that we should then look into when it comes to early intervention. What is exactly out there in these fields then, if people reflect that their work is influenced by these different normative kind of fields? So it's like, as I said, work in progress. I'm still writing about it, but in general, just to reflect a little bit when it comes to import restrictions and export restrictions in the EU at the moment, we know that we have some. This is the dual use regulation, the legal framework that allows to kind of, for the member states to establish certain lists of technologies that are prohibited to export from the EU, and then to extend it to other member states and kind of effectively prohibit certain technologies from being exported. We know that some countries have done that, and not only EU, but then in the European sphere, there's also UK and Switzerland who have recently introduced certain restrictions. And I, again, don't need to go that deep into it, but there are even, how does it work with the responsible research innovation or responsible quantum computing framework? It is a complicated question because, of course, we need to protect from the risks for national security, we need to ensure that the technologies that are developed are not used against, the European sovereignty or whatever. That is clear. But at the same time, of course, these restrictions are not necessarily the best tool, probably, especially if they're employed kind of just based on how many qubits a computer has, or the list of these cryogenic systems that are prohibited to be exported from the EU. I mean, if they're employed in this broad way, it can be more of an obstacle for some kind of market that is really just in the development. And we can talk a bit more about that. I'm still thinking about exactly what does it mean, but it is quite clear that this goes against certain principles like international cooperation, closure of the quantum gap, and all these different things. So that is a thing that legally exists, definitely affects entities, and it's also a thing that is quite questionable in some ways from the responsible quantum computing framework. Then the public procurement, I'm looking at the moment at that. Extremely interesting field. And when it comes to public procurement as such, the theory is well, actually, this is a very interesting tool that can absolutely be very powerful in emerging markets. For quantum computers in the EU currently, there are not that many clients who buy them. There are some, of course, but there are not that many. And the EU, that has established the entity, I will talk about it next slide a little bit, but it has actually a network of supercomputers and is buying now quantum computers that are being built in these supercomputing centers across the EU. The EU is a big buyer. And the EU will, according to literature in any case, or will have a possibility to demand, to create a demand for these technologies, and is kind of putting there a lot of money to demand from private companies, or not to demand, but to create a demand for private companies to kind of innovate in this field and build these machines. It reduces uncertainty in that field, of course, because if EU is dictating a certain standard of what users will expect in the future, what technologies will be developed further in the future, that is powerful. Which technical solution of the quantum computing will be the one that will be brought forward? That is actually by the these acquiring entities, not only in the EU itself, but also member states. That is a lot of power there, and so on. And you can have, especially the investment that EU is making, it could become a lead market, and so on. And that could dictate the standards, that could dictate many different things. And EU has this idea about possibilities to kind of integrate social values into their public procurement tenders and procedures, but none of them are mandatory. So I looked at the public procurement from the EU. They have this entity. This is European High Performance Computing Joint Undertaking, Euro HPC-JU. That is basically the juridical person that has the money that they buy and develop the infrastructure of supercomputers through with, and then also develops the infrastructure of quantum computers in the EU right now. There have been 6 public procurement tenders so far. 6 computers have been acquired, which is interesting, also very interesting. We see the technologies that were called for in the tenders, the basis of the quantum computers that were kind of what were the principles of the quantum computers that were being built, which they were functioning under, were different in each time, in each case, except superconducting qubits. And the companies that won these competitions are all different. It's not a single company that repeats. And still, we see already that there is a certain pattern. It's very good that there is a broad net that is being thrown. But in overall, the EU here has funded already for these 6 computers 72.28 million euros, and that's half of the whole sum. The other half was funded by the member states. So that's, again, public procurement, money being put in the market, a lot of money. How do the tenders look from the perspective of responsible quantum computing or quantum technologies? Interesting as well. Sustainable supply chains, it's a condition. You must, each company that is to provide a suggestion or a kind of offered on a tender, they have to indicate how they will kind of ensure that the supply chains for different components are sustainable. And that has to do with, I am not sure exactly, but each of these tenders had this as a standard kind of as a standard criterion or as a standard requirement. And that has probably to do that general practice in all different areas of technology. However, when it comes to environmental considerations in general, all asked for indications or specifications on power consumption, but there was no indication how much exactly that will weigh in the final decision. But only one country had anything else than just asking for the specific how much power they're consuming, these computers that they're buying. There are no other considerations of environment at all. Italy, because of their national strategic kind of framework that they have in their own country, asked for explicit statements and kind of work and self-reporting on environmental considerations. Open source software preferred where possible in all tenders except Poland. I don't know why, but also there is that requirement. And EU added value, there is also a requirement that is in all EU tenders that has some kind of possibilities maybe to reflect on responsible aspects, but not necessarily directly. And then gender equality and youth employment, only Italy, together with environmental considerations. I don't want to go over time, so I will not talk necessarily that much, but as you can see, there's not that much in those tenders. There's a little, but not that much. But there's open source software, for instance. We can ask why. This is the last slide, but so what we can learn from that and what can we go further with, or I, in the case of I'm planning to, is that there is not much at the moment in general when it comes to these export restrictions, but also public procurement at the moment. It has to do with responsible quantum computing or quantum technologies, but that's, but there is something. That's just a good thing, but it's a bit fragmented, and and there is very little on certain aspects. Maybe the opposite. Certain like restrictions for export are harming these aspects. Open source software, I read specifically about that. How did it end up in all those tenders? Because that's interesting, but it's because, or the explanations kind of that are there, they're not compulsory, these requirements for open source software either, but it's because it has such a long history. So there has been so much work already proving that not only this is better in many different respects, but also that it makes good economic sense, good commercial sense. And that's how, therefore, there is this condition now that because it is makes good economic sense as well. National initiatives could be very important because, listen, I mean, that is one of those computers will have to report specifically, self-report about environmental issues, about impact to youth employment. They will have to report on how much they have, put there in terms of the staff that are younger than 35 years and so on. And then just to kind of finalize this presentation, a lot of money are being put into quantum computing through these public initiatives. And so next step that I'm trying to do also to look at the funding frameworks and who are they funding and what requirements they are putting there. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. So we're 30 seconds over time, but that still gives you 4 minutes and 30 seconds to ask questions. So are there any questions? You learned you have to be fast.
Wonderful talk, and really nice that you look into the details of these calls and where the ethics and social elements come in. Do you know how the quantum computers have to, how the quantum computing time has to be divided according to the rules of because I believe that there are some requirements that the computing time which becomes available is used for societal and research purposes.
That's a good question, because I have worked with some other, there are some, of course, institutions that have that, and that probably will happen with these computers that when they will be built, but there is nothing in the tenders. Some of them ask for additional kind of requirements that it would be accessible 24/7. There has been put in some of them, which is interesting. Some don't actually say that at all. Some require additional training for users. So there is also that aspect, just not enough time to highlight, but definitely something, but nothing in the tender itself about the necessity to make sure that, for instance, users will get some amount of time.
But that could be a rule which applies to computing anyway.
That could be.
So it's not specific to quantum.
And it could be that this condition, kind of the kind of whatever it's called, the documents, the norms that are there for that entity itself who is getting the computer. So these supercomputing centers, they already have some kind of legislation there in place on these aspects. Absolutely, that also affects, but it's just also very hard to track these national kind of rule frameworks and so on. But probably there is something. At the same time, EU is spending so much money, they could be also putting their good practices into these different mechanisms, maybe. At least when it comes to these social values, the other social values, like in Italy's case, there is self-reporting. There is nothing more. You have to reflect on this aspect. You have to tell yourself how you're addressing it. So I think that could be a good way. But thank you.
Question? Yeah, great talk. Really enjoyed that. I might have to ask you for your slides. Did you get a sense of, you mentioned that you talked to some organizations to understand what policies were in place. Did you get a sense of what their reception to these kinds of requirements was and whether that was something that they engaged with?
And I didn't do any study on that. I just talked as a, and I maybe should do a study on that. But interesting question. Thank you. The sense was that they were like, norms? Because what influences your work? What? I don't know. Like, there was not necessarily understanding that there should be some kind of ethical or responsibility framework of some sort. And then after more conversation, like, oh yeah, I remember now in the standard, there was this requirement like open source software, which is like, yeah, that's responsible. It's like, yeah. So no, there is too little information for sure. I would agree.
Hey, thank you very much.
Thank you.